The Middle Ages, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th centuries, was a time when the boundaries between the natural and supernatural, the conscious and subconscious, were often blurred. Sleep was not merely a nightly necessity. It was a liminal state, a doorway into a world of dreams, visions, and nocturnal mysteries. Understanding the medieval perspective on sleep requires recognizing the blend of religious, medical, and folkloric beliefs that shaped how people experienced the night. Medieval people did not think of dreams in the purely psychological sense that modern science does. Instead, dreams were often viewed as messages from the divine, omens, or encounters with otherworldly forces. They were interpreted as signs of virtue or vice, predictions of fortune or disaster, or even communications with angels, demons, and spirits. Monks and scholars might consult dream manuals or theological texts to discern spiritual meaning, while peasants and villagers relied on folk traditions and oral advice. Sleep itself was treated with caution and respect. People believed that sleep opened the body and soul to spiritual influences. The nocturnal state was seen as a time when the boundaries between the human world and the invisible realms, heavenly, demonic, and fairy-like, were thinnest. This liminality imbued nightly rest with both potential blessing and danger. For instance, a child sleeping alone might be protected with amulets or prayers, and people might leave lights burning to ward off malevolent spirits. Medical texts, influenced by Galenic and Hippocratic traditions, also shaped beliefs about sleep. Health was thought to depend on the balance of humors, and disturbances in sleep could indicate illness or spiritual unrest. Dreams, especially vivid or disturbing ones, were sometimes interpreted as reflections of imbalances in the body. Insomnia, nightmares, and sleepwalking were not merely inconveniences, they were symptoms of moral, spiritual, or physiological conditions, often treated with herbal remedies, charms, or ritual interventions. The medieval calendar, tied closely to seasons, festivals, and church observances, also influenced night beliefs. Certain nights were considered supernatural or particularly potent, such as Christmas Eve, All Hallows Eve, and the night surrounding solstices, when dreams could carry prophetic power or be influenced by mystical forces. Seasonal shifts affected both sleep schedules and the kinds of dreams experienced, with longer winter nights providing more opportunities for reflection, contemplation, or supernatural encounters. Dreams themselves were categorized in various ways. Some were seen as divinely inspired visions, offering guidance or insight. Others were considered omens of misfortune, warnings to avoid certain actions or places. There were also deceptive or evil dreams, believed to be sent by demons or witches, designed to tempt, frighten, or confuse the sleeper. This taxonomy reflected a medieval understanding of the cosmos as populated by moral forces, each capable of influencing human life even in sleep. Sleep positions, bedtime rituals, and bedroom arrangements were also imbued with belief. People avoided sleeping with their heads pointing in certain directions or sharing beds with animals, fearing spiritual contamination or nocturnal attacks. Prayers, protective charms, and the presence of holy symbols near the bed were common measures to safeguard the sleeper from evil spirits, nocturnal visitations, and harmful dreams. Even the act of covering oneself or leaving a light burning was laden with symbolic meaning, demonstrating a constant awareness of the spiritual vulnerability inherent in sleep. The social context shaped night beliefs as well. Wealthier individuals could afford protective talismans, separate sleeping chambers, and bedside attendants, while common villagers relied on folk practices, communal wisdom, and household rituals. Regardless of class, sleep was never a passive or purely physical act. It was an arena where humans, spirits, and divine forces interacted. Tales of witches, night demons, and spectral visitors were not just superstition, they were part of a living cultural framework that made sense of the unpredictable nocturnal world. Furthermore, dreams were often recorded and analyzed. Monks, scholars, and dream interpreters compiled dream books that provided symbolic meanings for recurring images. A serpent might indicate treachery. A star could signify divine favor. Water might represent emotion or temptation, and flight could suggest spiritual elevation or danger. These interpretations were widely circulated, influencing both elite and popular understandings of the night. The act of recording and interpreting dreams demonstrates the medieval desire to control, understand, and find meaning in the uncertain night hours. In summary, sleep and dreams in the Middle Ages were far more than physiological phenomena. They were deeply interwoven with spiritual beliefs, moral philosophy, medical theory, and folklore. Nights were periods of both rest and heightened vulnerability, when humans might encounter angels, demons, or omens. Understanding these beliefs provides insight not only into medieval psychology but also into cultural values, fears, and hopes, revealing a world in which the night was a complex and potent space of interaction between the physical and metaphysical. In the next part, we will explore the role of dreams as divine messages, examining examples from religious texts and monastic interpretations, and how medieval people sought guidance through nocturnal visions. In medieval Europe, dreams were often understood as channels through which the divine communicated with humans. Far from being dismissed as mere mental activity during sleep, they were taken seriously as potentially sacred experiences, capable of offering guidance, warnings, or insights into the will of God. The religious worldview of the Middle Ages, deeply influenced by Christianity, placed humans in a universe where spiritual forces were active at all times, and sleep was seen as a moment when these forces could reach the soul directly. Clerics, monks, and theologians frequently categorized dreams as divinely inspired, diabolical, or mundane, with divine dreams representing the highest form of spiritual communication. A righteous dream could reveal moral truths, encourage repentance, or forewarn of impending dangers. For example, a vision of angels or saints might appear to an individual, delivering advice about ethical conduct, guidance in leadership, or reassurance during times of suffering. These dreams were often recorded in monastic chronicles or hagiographies, highlighting the educational and moral lessons that could be drawn from nocturnal experiences. Saints' lives and miracle accounts frequently include dreams as instruments of divine intervention. Medieval hagiographies describe visions where saints appeared to ordinary people in sleep, offering guidance on charitable acts, spiritual devotion, or the proper course of action during crises. In one account, a farmer dreaming of a saint's counsel might awaken and change the way he treated his neighbors, believing his dream to be a direct message from heaven. Similarly, kings and nobles often took dreams as divine counsel in matters of governance, warfare, or justice, interpreting signs and symbols as instructions from God. Religious manuals and monastic writings often codified dream interpretation. Authors such as Isidore of Seville and later medieval commentators categorized dreams according to their spiritual origin. Dreams from God were expected to be clear, moral, and beneficial, guiding the dreamer toward righteous action. Conversely, dreams from evil spirits were often deceitful, confusing, or morally ambiguous, designed to lead the sleeper into sin. A particularly vivid or disturbing dream could be interpreted in multiple ways, with consultation from clerics or educated interpreters helping the individual discern whether the message was divine, demonic, or mundane. The medieval understanding of angels and demons heavily influenced dream interpretation. Angels were believed to deliver guidance, warnings, or comfort, often appearing as radiant beings, messengers, or figures of authority. Demons, by contrast, were thought to invade sleep to tempt, frighten, or mislead. Nightmares, sleep paralysis, and terrifying visions were frequently explained as attacks from malevolent spiritual beings. Individuals might protect themselves through prayer, recitation of psalms, or the use of blessed objects to ensure their dreams were more likely to be divinely inspired than corrupted by evil forces. Dream manuals and texts served as guides for interpreting divine messages. These compendiums included lists of common dream symbols and their meanings, often blending theological, medical, and folkloric knowledge. Seeing water, for instance, could indicate spiritual purification. A snake might signal spiritual danger, and the appearance of certain animals could carry moral or prophetic significance. The manuals not only instructed the reader on interpretation but reinforced the belief that the nighttime mind was susceptible to spiritual influence, making attentiveness and moral clarity crucial. Dreams as moral instruction were especially significant in monastic life. Monks and nuns were encouraged to reflect on their dreams for signs of divine favor or as indicators of moral failings. Vivid dreams could prompt confession, prayer, or changes in behavior, demonstrating the belief that sleep was a medium for spiritual correction and personal growth. Even sinful or troubling dreams were treated as opportunities to examine one's conscience, seek guidance from God, and strengthen piety. The role of ritual and prayer in facilitating divine dreams cannot be overstated. Medieval people often recited prayers before bed, invoked saints for protection, or placed religious objects near their sleeping area to invite heavenly visions. Devotional practices were intended to orient the dreamer spiritually, increasing the likelihood of receiving morally beneficial or divinely guided dreams. Certain nights, such as Christmas Eve or saints' feast days, were believed to be particularly potent for sacred visions, blending temporal observances with spiritual receptivity. Dreams as divine messages were not solely personal experiences. They also had social and political implications. Rulers, military leaders, and community figures sometimes used dreams as a basis for decisions, believing that guidance received in sleep could justify actions, inspire confidence, or warn of danger. Clerics might interpret these dreams publicly, lending spiritual legitimacy to political or social decisions. In this way, dreams functioned as mediators between private experience and communal life, reinforcing the intertwining of spirituality, morality, and society. Summary: in the Middle Ages, dreams were often considered sacred channels of communication from God, carrying moral instruction, warnings, and spiritual insight. They were interpreted through religious texts, guided by clerics, and reinforced by ritual practices, reflecting a worldview in which the night was a bridge between the human and divine. Understanding dreams as divine messages illustrates the medieval conviction that the subconscious was a moral and spiritual arena where vigilance, prayer, and reflection could shape both personal behavior and communal life. In the next part, we will explore dreams as omens and prophecy, examining how medieval people interpreted nocturnal visions as warnings of future events, personal misfortune, or societal upheaval. In medieval Europe, dreams were frequently considered portents of future events, both personal and communal. Unlike divine messages that offered guidance or moral instruction, these dreams were often viewed as forewarnings, omens, or predictions, sometimes carrying an unsettling or mysterious quality. People interpreted these nocturnal experiences as signs from God, spirits, or cosmic forces, indicating that the future was at least partially readable to those who knew how to decode the symbols and messages embedded within sleep. One of the fundamental beliefs of the Middle Ages was that the world was interconnected through spiritual and natural forces, and dreams provided a unique window into this hidden order. Events in the dream world could prefigure occurrences in waking life: illness, death, prosperity, or misfortune. For example, a merchant dreaming of a sinking ship might interpret it as a warning of financial loss, while a soldier dreaming of blood might anticipate an upcoming battle or political turmoil. In rural communities, visions of animals, weather, or celestial phenomena often had agricultural significance, guiding planting, harvest, or preparation for famine or disaster. Dream interpretation manuals, widely circulated in the later Middle Ages, provided extensive symbolic dictionaries to aid in decoding these omens. Snakes, birds, stars, fire, water, and even mundane objects could carry prophetic significance. A serpent might symbolize treachery or hidden danger, while a star could indicate a favorable outcome. Context, moral standing, and personal circumstances were considered crucial. The same symbol could foretell blessing for a righteous dreamer or calamity for someone morally compromised. These manuals represented a structured attempt to systematize the unpredictable nature of dreams, bridging folk belief theology and emerging psychological insight. Night visions and prophetic dreams were often taken particularly seriously when they occurred repeatedly or vividly. A dream that returned night after night was understood as a persistent message from the spiritual or cosmic order, demanding attention. Medieval people sometimes recorded these dreams in chronicles, letters, or personal diaries, consulting clerics or learned interpreters to understand the implications. For example, a noble might be advised to delay a journey, make reparations, or alter political decisions based on dream omens, demonstrating the practical influence of nocturnal visions. The role of astrology and celestial observation intersected with dream prophecy. Medieval thought linked the movements of stars and planets to earthly events, and dreams were sometimes interpreted in light of celestial conditions. A particular planetary alignment might make certain nights more potent for prophetic dreams, and symbols within the dream were read as coded messages from the heavens. Astrology, dream manuals, and religious interpretation often overlapped, creating a complex interpretive framework where divine, cosmic, and natural signs converged. Omens of misfortune were often conveyed through nightmares or disturbing visions. Dreams of falling, drowning, or death were commonly believed to predict accidents, illness, or mortality. Medieval observers often emphasized the moral dimension of such dreams. The dream might serve as a warning to amend sinful behavior, undertake penance, or seek divine protection. Nightmares were not dismissed as mere imagination. They were potentially life-saving messages, urging reflection and vigilance. Community and social implications of prophetic dreams were significant. In some cases, dreams were shared publicly to warn neighbors of impending danger, natural disaster, or political upheaval. A villager dreaming of a flood might alert others to fortify homes, while a noble interpreting dreams of rebellion could prepare defenses. This sharing of nocturnal insight demonstrates that dreams functioned as both personal and collective guidance, influencing decisions and shaping community responses. Dreams predicting health or illness were another common category. Medieval medicine intertwined spiritual belief and humoral theory, and certain visions were interpreted as signs of imbalance or impending sickness. A vision of black water or decaying food could be read as a warning of digestive or infectious problems, prompting herbal remedies, dietary adjustments, or prayer. Such interpretations show how medical, spiritual, and symbolic frameworks were often inseparable in the medieval mind. Night terrors and encounters with supernatural entities, demons, spirits, or witches were also interpreted as prophetic. A terrifying vision could signal spiritual attack, personal misfortune, or broader community danger. Protective measures, such as prayer, amulets, or ritual cleansing, were employed not only to guard the sleeper, but also to avert the foreseen outcome, reflecting a proactive approach to dream prophecy. Recording and sharing dreams was a common practice among the literate. Monks, nobles, and scholars often documented recurring visions or unusual omens, sometimes incorporating them into chronicles of events. Dreams that coincided with real-life occurrences were cited as proof of divine or cosmic intervention, reinforcing faith in prophetic sleep. Even ordinary villagers might recount dreams to family or neighbors, seeking guidance and validation through communal interpretation. Summary: In the Middle Ages, dreams as omens and prophecy were a vital aspect of nocturnal life. They were understood as messages revealing the future, shaped by divine, demonic, or cosmic influence. Interpretation drew upon symbolic manuals, religious guidance, astrology, and folk wisdom, reflecting a worldview in which the night was both mysterious and instructive. Prophetic dreams influenced personal, social, and political decisions, highlighting the profound role of sleep in medieval thought. In the next part, we will explore the dangers of sleep and night fears, including demons, witches, and the anxieties associated with nocturnal vulnerability in medieval culture. When the sun set over medieval Europe, the world transformed into a place of uncertainty and dread. The night was not merely a time for rest, it was a realm of unseen forces, where both the body and the soul were thought to be vulnerable to attack. Sleep, though necessary for survival, was paradoxically seen as dangerous, a temporary death of the senses that left one open to demonic visitations, witchcraft, and spectral wanders. The medieval imagination filled the darkness with creatures and spirits, each waiting for the moment when the human spirit loosened its grip on wakefulness. Fear of the dark in the Middle Ages was more than a primitive instinct. It was a deeply ingrained cultural and religious anxiety. The night represented not just physical obscurity, but spiritual blindness and moral peril. Priests preached that sinful acts, lust, theft, witchcraft thrived under moonlight, and that darkness was the natural environment of the devil and his servants. To close one's eyes and sleep was to risk exposure to these forces, for in sleep the mind's defenses were weakened, and the soul wandered in realms where good and evil contended. In countless households, night prayers and rituals were performed before sleep. Candles were blessed, crosses hung above beds, and invocations recited to ward off evil spirits. The Pater Noster, Our Father, and Ave Maria were among the most common nightly protections, repeated until the words blurred with exhaustion. Some people even kept holy relics or consecrated herbs under their pillows, such as rosemary, sage, or St. John's wort, to repel witches or demons. These practices reveal how deeply intertwined faith and fear were in the medieval night. Among the most terrifying nocturnal phenomena was the belief in night demons and the incubus or succubus spirits that assaulted sleepers, often in a sexual or suffocating manner. The incubus, a male demon, was said to visit women at night, pressing upon their chests and stealing their vitality. The succubus, its female counterpart, preyed upon men, draining their life through lustful dreams. These experiences likely described sleep paralysis, a condition unknown to medieval science, but they were interpreted as literal demonic attacks. Victims awoke trembling, gasping, and convinced that they had been visited by infernal beings. Witchcraft and nocturnal harm were also grave concerns. It was widely believed that witches performed their most potent spells and curses under the cover of darkness. A restless sleeper might awaken with bruises or marks and believe they had been ridden by a witch, their spirit forced into servitude in nocturnal Sabbath. Animals, especially cats, owls, and bats, were regarded with suspicion as familiars or manifestations of witchly power. Cats wandering through moonlit streets were feared to be spies for witches, and if one stared into a sleeping person's face, it was said to steal their breath or soul. In the countryside, people believed that wandering spirits and the unquiet dead roamed the night. Ghosts of those who had died without confession, suicides, or victims of injustice were thought to haunt roads, crossroads, and graveyards, seeking prayers or revenge. To encounter such a spirit in dreams or during late-night waking was a dire omen. Monks often told tales of dead brothers appearing in dreams, begging for masses to release their souls from purgatory. Sleep, therefore, was not just physical rest, it was a time when the veil between the living and the dead thinned. Nightmares or evil dreams were considered both spiritual and physical afflictions. They were blamed on sin, demonic temptation, or even improper diet. Medieval medicine suggested that heavy food or undigested meats caused vapors to rise from the stomach to the brain, disturbing sleep and producing grotesque visions. But religious teachers emphasized the moral dimension. An unclean soul invited the devil's presence in dreams. Thus, fasting, confession, and purity of thought before bed were seen as essential to safe, peaceful sleep. Another peril of sleep came from the physical dangers of the night itself. In a world without electric light, medieval homes were dim and treacherous after sundown. Fires or candles left burning for warmth or safety often caused accidents, setting straw beds or wooden walls ablaze. Thieves, too, preferred the night when travelers and villagers were most vulnerable. People locked doors and barred windows not only against robbers but also to keep out wandering spirits. Sleep was never entirely safe. It was a calculated risk taken each night. For travelers and peasants who worked far from home, sleeping outdoors was fraught with danger. Forests and moors were believed to be haunted by fairies, goblins, and shape-shifting beasts. A lone sleeper might awaken to strange lights or noises and interpret them as signs of enchantment. Some carried charms made of iron or hawthorn wood, both thought to repel fairies. The fear of sleeping unprotected in wild places reflected both practical caution and mythic imagination, a fusion of survival instinct and supernatural dread. Even within monasteries, where discipline and faith were strongest, night fears persisted. Monks rose for matins in the middle of the night, walking through cold, silent corridors illuminated only by torches. The darkness of the cloisters was said to test the soul's courage. Chroniclers record tales of monks hearing whispers, seeing spectral lights, or being assailed by visions during prayer. These experiences were interpreted as either demonic temptations or divine trials, reminders of the eternal battle waged even in the quiet hours of night. The Church responded to nocturnal fears with specific prayers and rituals for protection during sleep. The Compline, the final prayer service of the day, explicitly asked for divine guardianship through the hours of darkness. Visit this place, O Lord, and drive far from it all snares of the enemy. In this liturgy, one can sense the medieval view of the night as a battlefield, a time when unseen forces pressed close and only faith stood as defense. Sleep was both surrender and trust, the body resting while the soul relied on divine mercy to survive until dawn. By the late Middle Ages, as towns grew and nightly curfews became common, the darkness of the night was gradually domesticated. City guards patrolled the streets, bells marked the closing of gates, and torches flickered in public squares. Yet fear of the nocturnal persisted. Even when artificial light began to challenge natural darkness, people continued to see the night as a time of moral testing and spiritual danger. It was never fully safe to close one's eyes. Summary: for medieval people, sleep was not an innocent rest but a vulnerable passage through shadowed realms. The night brought demons, witches, ghosts, and moral peril, and survival depended on faith, ritual, and constant vigilance. Darkness was both physical and symbolic, a mirror of the soul's fragility in a world where evil was always near. To sleep without prayer was to invite the unknown, and every dawn was a small resurrection, a triumph of the waking spirit over the terrors of the night. In the same age that feared the dangers of sleep and the spirits of darkness, there also existed another, more radiant vision of the night, a belief that through sleep and dreams, one might commune directly with the divine. To the medieval Christian mind, God could speak not only through scripture or the clergy, but also through visions granted to the humble sleeper. This belief transformed sleep into a potential act of grace, and dreams into a pathway of revelation. Monastic writers often describe sleep as a state where the soul could rise toward heaven, freed from the distractions of the flesh. For holy men and women, the night was not only a time of rest but a sacred laboratory of the spirit, where prayer and sleep intermingled. They believed that when the body lay still, and the senses dimmed, the soul became receptive to divine messages, visions, symbols, and encounters with angels or saints. The Bible itself offered many precedents for this belief. Jacob's dream of the ladder reaching to heaven, Joseph's prophetic visions of Egypt, and the angelic messages received by Mary and Joseph. All these examples reinforced the idea that God spoke through dreams. Medieval Christians saw themselves as living in continuity with these biblical figures. The humble shepherd or the cloistered nun could, through purity and faith, receive dreams of the same divine order. Monastic sleep, however, was tightly regulated. In most abbeys, monks and nuns were instructed to sleep lightly, clothed and facing the cross, ready to rise at the bell for midnight prayers. Excessive sleep was seen as a temptation of the flesh, a kind of spiritual laziness that dulled the soul's awareness. The rule of St. Benedict warned against sloth and excessive comfort, emphasizing wakefulness and vigilance even in rest. Yet within this discipline, many monks and mystics experienced holy visions during slumber, often interpreting them as signs of their spiritual progress. Some of the most famous mystics of the Middle Ages described their divine encounters in vivid dreamlike language. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess and visionary, recorded extraordinary images of radiant beings, cosmic order, and divine harmony that came to her not in dreams or sleep, but in waking vision. Yet her experiences reflected the same spiritual logic, the soul as a vessel for celestial revelation. Likewise, Julian of Norwich and Macfield of Magburg wrote of mystical unions with Christ that blurred the line between waking meditation and nocturnal trance. For ordinary believers, holy dreams were often milder but deeply personal. A peasant might dream of a saint appearing in light, offering healing or protection. A mother might dream of the Virgin Mary comforting her during illness or childbirth. These visions were treasured as proof of divine care, and sometimes reported to priests or incorporated into local legends. Pilgrimage shrines often claimed to have been founded after such dreams. A farmer directed by St. Michael, or a shepherd discovering a holy spring revealed in his sleep. Saintly sleep itself became a sign of holiness. Hagiographies, the biographies of saints, frequently describe their sleep as peaceful, brief, and illuminated. Some saints were said to levitate during sleep, surrounded by heavenly fragrance, or to glow with light. Their rest symbolized perfect harmony between body and spirit, a foretaste of eternal peace. Even the way a saint awoke was spiritually charged. Some were said to rise smiling, others to utter words of praise as if continuing a conversation begun in heaven. In monasteries and convents, the notion of the holy dream intertwined with communal devotion. When a monk dreamed of an angel or a departed brother, he was encouraged to share it at chapter meetings, where it might be examined for spiritual significance. Such dreams were rarely dismissed as imagination. They were considered possible manifestations of divine will. If a dream revealed that a soul suffered in purgatory, the community might dedicate prayers or fasting to assist it. Thus, dreams became instruments of mercy as well as revelation. Dream pilgrimage was another fascinating aspect of medieval piety. Some dreamers claimed to travel in spirit to distant holy sites, the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, the shrine of St. James at Compostela, or even the gates of heaven itself. These experiences, whether symbolic or visionary, provided the poor and immobile a spiritual journey in place of a physical one. The idea that one's soul could wander the sacred landscape in sleep affirmed the medieval conviction that the body was not a barrier to grace, only a temporary vessel. Certain religious orders even experimented with the cultivation of holy dreams. Monks would recite psalms or chant softly as they drifted into sleep, hoping to align their dreams with prayer. Some slept with relics near their heads or placed blessed water beneath their beds to purify their visions. The dream became an extension of prayer, and the bed a substitute altar. Sleep, under such discipline, ceased to be passive. It was an act of worship carried out in silence and stillness. But not all dreams were trusted. even when they appeared holy. Theologians debated whether nocturnal visions could be deceptive, sent not by God but by the devil in disguise. Thomas Aquinas, in his Summa Theologica, warned that not all dreams came from divine sources. Some arose from bodily humors or demonic interference. True prophetic dreams, he taught, must align with Scripture and the moral order of the Church. Thus, while dreams could inspire awe, they also demanded discernment, a careful weighing of spiritual meaning against orthodoxy. The line between holy vision and heresy could be perilously thin. In times of social upheaval, dreamers who claimed to receive direct orders from heaven risked suspicion or persecution. Some were celebrated as prophets, others condemned as fanatics. Yet even skeptics acknowledged that God sometimes chose the lowly and unlearned to receive revelation. The tension between faith and fear of deception gave rise to a rich literature of dream analysis, blending mysticism with theological caution. Ultimately, for medieval Christians, sleep was not merely the opposite of waking, it was a mirror of the soul's eternal destiny. The good sleeper, whose dreams were peaceful and bright, was believed to live in harmony with God. The restless or haunted dreamer reflected inner sin or spiritual warfare. The night thus revealed the hidden truth of each person's heart, beyond the masks of daylight behavior. Summary: in this vision of the night, sleep was no longer an enemy to be feared, but a bridge to the sacred. Dreams could carry divine messages, reveal hidden sins, heal the sick, or comfort the afflicted. From the cloisters of abbés to the straw beds of peasants, medieval people sought in their sleep not just rest, but communion with the divine. The same darkness that hid demons could also cradle angels, and the same stillness that invited danger could become a window into heaven. While faith and fear shaped much of medieval understanding of the night, there was also a quieter, more rational curiosity that grew alongside religious belief. The attempt to explain sleep through natural philosophy and medicine. Medieval thinkers did not view science and faith as opposites, rather, they sought harmony between them. The soul could dream and commune with the divine, yes, but the body too followed laws of nature ordained by God. Thus, to understand sleep was to glimpse a part of the divine order itself. The foundation of medieval medical theory rested upon the ancient Greek and Roman texts preserved and expanded through translation and commentary. Hippocrates, Galen, and later Arabic physicians such as Avicenna and Averroes offered a framework that shaped how European scholars understood the body's functions, including sleep. According to these authorities, the body was governed by four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and health depended on their balance. Sleep was the natural result of the humors shifting in harmony. Waking occurred when they were stirred into motion again. In Galenic physiology, sleep was explained as a process of cooling and restoration. When one fell asleep, the body's heat retreated inward to aid digestion and replenish vitality. The brain cooled, the senses shut down, and the soul's animal spirits, subtle substances thought to carry perception and motion, withdrew from the surface of the body. This theory elegantly explained why deep sleep followed a heavy meal. Digestion required inner heat, and sleep facilitated it. Conversely, fasting or hunger kept the spirits active, leading to wakefulness, and sometimes even vivid dreams. Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, one of the most influential texts in medieval Europe, describes sleep as essential to health. He compared it to night itself, a period of cooling and calmness that balanced the day's heat and activity. Too much sleep, however, was dangerous. It could produce sluggish humors, cloud the mind, and lead to melancholy. Too little, on the other hand, dried the body and provoked fever or delirium. Physicians thus prescribed careful moderation, often recommending 6 to 8 hours of rest, ideally beginning soon after sunset and ending before dawn prayers. The connection between sleep and digestion dominated medieval medical thought. Doctors advised patients to eat light suppers and to sleep on their right side, allowing food to pass easily through the stomach. As digestion advanced, one was to roll to the left, ensuring complete balance. Manuals of health, such as Tacunum Sanitatis, illustrated ideal sleeping postures, diets, and environments for rest. Even the position of the head mattered. Too high a pillow would hinder the flow of animal spirits, while too low a pillow risked congestion and bad dreams. The environment of sleep was also considered a medical factor. Medieval doctors cautioned against damp or foul air, believing it corrupted the humors and encouraged disease. Bedrooms were to be aired by day and closed at night, keeping out wind and miasma. In towns and monasteries, herbs like lavender, mint, and rue were burned or scattered on floors to purify the air and promote calm sleep. The hum of insects, the smoke of candles, and even the sound of bells were thought to influence the quality of rest, for all sensations entered the body and disturbed or soothed the vital spirits. Dreams, too, were explained in physiological terms, even as theologians sought spiritual meaning. Physicians argued that dreams reflected the movements of vapors rising from the stomach to the brain during digestion. Pleasant dreams arose from sweet or balanced vapors, nightmares from heavy, smoky, or corrupted ones. Thus, a meal of fatty meat or cheese might provoke terrifying visions, while fruits or herbs produced gentle and harmonious dreams. The stomach, in this view, was the gateway between the physical and the visionary, a fragile bridge between the body and the soul. Sleep disorders, though rarely named as such, were known and feared. The inability to sleep, or insomnia, was called wakeful fever or restless humors. Physicians treated it with cooling syrups made of lettuce, poppy, or vinegar of roses. Those who suffered from excessive sleepiness, often a symptom of melancholy or lethargy, were urged to take exercise, smell pungent herbs, or bleed small amounts of blood to lighten the body's load. Even nightmares had medical remedies. A charm of rue tied around the wrist, a draught of warm wine infused with sage, or prayers to ward off the incubus vapors that suffocated sleepers. Astrological medicine also played a role in the understanding of sleep. The positions of the moon and planets were thought to influence the body's humors and the mind's receptivity. Physicians consulted celestial charts to determine the best times for sleeping, bleeding, or administering medicine. The moon, associated with moisture and dreams, was said to rule over sleep itself. A full moon might provoke restlessness or strange visions, a dark moon deeper and heavier slumber. This union of astrology and medicine reflects the medieval conviction that the human body was a miniature cosmos, mirroring the harmony of the heavens. Within monasteries, physicians and infirmarians approached sleep both medically and spiritually. They believed that a monk's sleep should be moderate, pure, and disciplined, neither indulgent nor neglected. Sleep was part of the rhythm of obedience, a tool for maintaining the health needed to serve God. The infirmaries of large abbeys contained herbs and infusions designed to induce gentle sleep, valerian, chamomile, and honeyed wine. But they also prescribed confession for those haunted by nightmares, recognizing that spiritual unrest could manifest as physical disturbance. The relationship between sleep and morality fascinated medieval thinkers. Sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins, was not mere laziness, but a spiritual heaviness, a sleep of the soul. Monks warned against excessive napping or daydreaming as signs of acedia, the noonday demon that dulled the will to prayer. Yet rest, when taken in due measure, was virtuous, a renewal of strength for the service of God. Theologians and physicians alike agreed the quality of one's sleep reflected the state of one's soul and body alike. By the later Middle Ages, as universities blossomed and medical study grew more systematic, scholars began to collect observations about sleep from both science and scripture. They sought to reconcile Galen with Genesis, arguing that when God rested on the 7th day, he established the divine rhythm of wakefulness and repose. To sleep was to participate in that rhythm, a microcosmic echo of creation itself. Summary: For medieval physicians, sleep was not merely a mystery or a superstition. It was a vital function governed by natural law and divine harmony. It cooled the body, balanced the humors, purified the mind, and allowed the soul to rest in peace. The science of sleep was thus a moral and spiritual discipline, as well as a medical necessity. Every pillow, every herb, every prayer served to align the sleeper with the order of creation, the great cosmic balance of light and darkness, motion and stillness, waking and dream. The act of sleep in medieval Europe was not just a private event of the body. It was a deeply social, material, and spiritual experience, shaped by the spaces people inhabited and the objects they used. To understand how medieval people slept, we must enter their rooms, lift their blankets, and listen to the creak of timber frames in the flickering candlelight. Sleep was performed within a physical world of wood, wool, linen, and straw, a world whose structure reflected hierarchy, custom, and belief. In the medieval imagination, the bed was not merely furniture. It was a symbol of life's passages. Birth, rest, illness, love, and death all occurred upon it. In noble households, the bed was often the most valuable item of possession, sometimes more costly than horses or armor. It was portable, ornate, and enveloped in curtains, allowing for warmth and privacy in cold, drafty halls. The four-poster bed, with its canopy and draped fabric, created a cocoon of safety within the vastness of a stone chamber. These enclosed spaces were as much spiritual fortresses as physical ones, protecting the sleeper from cold air and from the unseen terrors of the night. For the wealthy and powerful, sleeping arrangements were both luxurious and hierarchical. A lord and lady might share a large, feather-filled mattress supported by ropes or wooden slats. Fine linen sheets, dyed blankets, and fur coverings from fox, marten, or squirrel ensured comfort in winter. The bedchamber itself often served multiple functions: a place for sleep, intimacy, private meetings, and sometimes even receiving guests. Beds were political symbols. To invite someone into one's chamber was to offer trust, intimacy, or alliance. A royal bed could be both a throne and a sanctuary. The bed curtains served more than decorative purposes. In an age without central heating, they trapped body heat, muffled sound, and kept out insects. But they also carried symbolic meaning. Drawn curtains enclosed the sleeper like a sacred space, a small chapel of repose. Embroidered with heraldry, saints, or floral patterns, they declared wealth and piety. At night, when candles were extinguished and darkness thickened, the bed's enclosure transformed into a microcosm of the cosmos. The sleeper in the center, surrounded by layers of protection against cold, noise, and evil. In humbler dwellings, sleep was simpler but no less meaningful. Peasants and artisans often slept on straw pallets or rough wooden frames covered with hay rushes or feathers if they were lucky. The bedding was shared, and the household slept communally, parents, children, and sometimes servants or guests together, especially in winter when warmth was scarce. The bed was not private property but a shared human resource. Privacy as we know it today did not exist. Sleep was collective, and its rhythms synchronized with the household's life and labor. In one-room cottages, sleep followed the seasonal and daily cycles of work. People rose and laid down with the sun, and in the long winter nights they practiced segmented sleep, a pattern well documented in medieval writings. After sunset, they slept for a few hours, then woke around midnight for a period of quiet wakefulness, prayer, conversation, or even tending the hearth. This first sleep and second sleep rhythm matched the body's natural cycle and reflected a worldview in which time was measured not by clocks but by the living rhythm of day and night. Beds were not always confined to bedrooms. The very concept of a bedroom, a room devoted solely to sleeping, developed slowly. In early medieval homes, people slept wherever space allowed: benches, corners, hearthsides. In castles and great houses, servants often slept in corridors or under their master's bed, available at need. The chamber of a lord or lady was rarely solitary. It might host retainers, attendants, and guards. The distinction between private and public rest was blurred, and the night was never entirely silent or empty. The bed's location within the room was also significant. Manuals of health advised placing it against an inner wall, away from drafts and direct moonlight for moonbeams. It was said could disturb sleep or even drive one mad. Beds were often oriented east-west, aligning the sleeper with the rising sun, a symbolic gesture toward resurrection and divine order. In monastic cells, beds were positioned toward the crucifix or altar, transforming the act of lying down into an imitation of death and prayer. Textiles and cleanliness reflected both comfort and morality. In wealthy households, sheets were washed regularly in lye and perfumed with herbs, while the poor relied on simple straw that was changed only seasonally. The yearly changing of rushes in floors, and often in bedding, became a communal ritual. Yet the bed was always a space of tension between purity and decay. Fleas, lice, and vermin thrived in warmth, and much medical advice concerned their prevention. The use of wormwood, lavender, or mint near bedding was as much about hygiene as about symbolism. They were plants of purification, protecting both body and soul. The rituals surrounding bedtime were deeply rooted in faith. Before lying down, people often made the sign of the cross, recited the compline, and invoked their guardian angel. Children learned early to say the familiar medieval bedtime prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep." This act of surrendering consciousness was also a surrendering of control. The sleeper entrusted their soul to God, trusting to wake again by His mercy. In a world where death could come suddenly by sickness, fire, or childbirth, every sleep carried a quiet echo of mortality. For those in illness or old age, the bed took on a new role, that of the deathbed, a sacred theater where the soul prepared for its final sleep. The dying person was surrounded by candles, priests, and family. Their bed became an altar of passage, and the last words spoken before closing one's eyes were recorded as signs of virtue or sin. In chronicles and hagiographies, death in bed was described as peaceful and saintly. Death elsewhere, on the road, in battle, or in sin, was feared as unshriven and cursed. Thus, the architecture of sleep mirrored the architecture of eternity. The nightly world extended beyond walls as well. Bells marked curfew and prayer, announcing when the town should darken its fires. Travelers and late workers carried lanterns through narrow streets, their steps echoing between shuttered windows. Watchmen called the hours, reminding all of the passage of time. From noble bedchambers to peasant huts, sleep wove itself into the great collective rhythm of medieval life, part natural, part divine, endlessly repeating. Summary: the medieval bed and its surrounding space tell us how people understood not only comfort but existence itself. Sleep took place within a web of meanings, material, social, and spiritual. The bed was a miniature cosmos, reflecting order and faith. Its curtains formed a veil between the known and the unseen. Whether in castles or cottages, the medieval sleeper lay down each night within a world at once intimate and immense, trusting that warmth, prayer, and the structure of the world itself would keep the darkness at bay. In medieval Europe, sleep was not merely an individual act but a mirror reflecting the entire social structure. To understand how people slept is to glimpse how they lived, worked, loved, and feared. Sleep revealed class, faith, gender, and even moral order. It was shaped by one's position in the great hierarchy of medieval life. From the crowned king to the barefoot serf, from the cloistered nun to the wandering beggar. Let us first look upward, toward the nobility and the upper classes, whose sleeping habits were as ceremonious as their waking lives. For the aristocracy, sleep was not simply rest but ritual. A nobleman's chamber, rich with tapestries and embroidered cushions, was a stage for the performance of status. To enter the lord's bedchamber was to cross a threshold of intimacy and power. Servants might help undress their master, warming the linens by the hearth before he lay down. Wealthy households often had a great bed, large enough for several attendants or family members, surrounded by curtains heavy with brocade. The bed symbolized dominion, mastery over space, wealth, and even over the night itself. Noblewomen, too, held court from their beds. In chronicles and romances, queens received messengers or granted favors while reclining. The bed could become a throne, a confessional, even a battlefield of intrigue. The morning ritual of rising, attended by ladies-in-waiting, perfumes, and holy water, was both sacred and theatrical. Sleep itself was seen as a divine gift that must be properly entered into and departed from, with prayers marking both transitions. But if we turn to the common people, we find a strikingly different rhythm. Peasants, craftsmen, and laborers lived in small, crowded dwellings where privacy was nearly non-existent. The fire in the hearth was the center of life and warmth, and at night all gathered near to rest. Husbands, wives, children, and even guests often shared the same bed or sleeping platform. The notion of a private bed was rare, sleep was communal, and bodies huddled together for heat in the long, cold winters. In some regions, servants and apprentices slept in barns, attics, or under tables wrapped in their cloaks. Travelers slept in stables, monasteries, or roadside inns, sometimes 3 or 4 to a bed. The physical closeness of sleep bred both intimacy and suspicion, a mingling of trust, necessity, and moral judgment. Church preachers often warned against sinful closeness, especially between unmarried people sharing a bed. To share a bed was, in the eyes of moralists, to share temptation. Interestingly, the medieval church did not always condemn shared sleeping. In many convents and monasteries, monks and nuns slept communally, though their beds were separated by small partitions or curtains. The dormitory, or dorter, was arranged in rows, each monk sleeping fully clothed, ready to rise at midnight for matins. The strictness of monastic life extended to the very act of sleep, bodies faced upward, hands crossed on the chest, in imitation of the dead awaiting resurrection. Sleep was not indulgence but discipline, a rehearsal for the grave and the life beyond. In contrast, the peasantry's sleep was governed less by bells than by the demands of the land. During harvest or lambing season, they might rise before dawn and work until dark. Sleep came in short bursts, often dictated by the cycle of daylight. In summer, people might sleep less but nap during the heat of the day. In winter, nights were long, and sleep followed the ancient pattern of 2 distinct phases: the first sleep and second sleep. After the first few hours, people would wake for an hour or 2 to tend the fire, pray, eat a small meal, or even visit neighbors. Then they would return to bed until dawn. This segmented sleep created a liminal time between midnight and morning, a space for reflection, prayer, and sometimes for sin. Gender played a defining role in how and where people slept. Women's sleep was often disrupted by the demands of childbirth, nursing, and domestic labor. A mother might sleep lightly, always alert to her children's cries. Servant women often slept in kitchens or storerooms, near their work. Men, especially those who labored in fields or workshops, fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. Yet both men and women carried spiritual anxieties into their sleep: fear of dying unshriven, of demonic attacks, of dreams revealing hidden sins. Among the clergy and scholars, sleep was considered a double-edged state, necessary for health, dangerous for the soul. Too much sleep was a sin of sloth, while too little weakened the mind. Monks followed strict rules about when and how to rest. Benedict's rule prescribed that sleep should be moderate, on simple bedding, and taken clothed, so that one could rise instantly for prayer if summoned by the bell. This discipline reflected the belief that sleep, like hunger or desire, must be governed by reason and faith. Even in secular life, moralists and physicians echoed this idea. Medical texts of the time, often based on Galen and Avicenna, claimed that sleep cooled and moistened the body, balancing its humors. Too much sleep was thought to produce lethargy and melancholy, too little caused fever and agitation. Physicians prescribed the best hours for rest, not immediately after eating, not during the heat of day, but in the quiet of early night. They advised lying on the right side first, then turning to the left to aid digestion and protect the heart. In this way, the act of sleeping became a kind of bodily theology, linking health, morality, and divine order. Sleep also revealed the boundaries of class. In towns, artisans or merchants might afford a private bedchamber, a sign of upward mobility. The wealthy could pay for feather mattresses, imported blankets, or mosquito netting, small luxuries that separated them from the poor. But even among the rich, sleep was not free from danger. Fires, theft, and sudden illness haunted the night. Candles burned low beside beds. Prayers and charms were kept at hand. The line between rest and peril was thin, and every household, from manor to cottage, carried its own rituals of protection. It is striking how communal sleep shaped social bonds. In an age before privacy, the warmth and vulnerability of shared sleep reinforced trust within families and communities. To share a bed was to share life itself. Even travelers who met by chance often slept side by side, bound by temporary fraternity. Yet that same closeness bred anxiety, fear of disease, lust, or betrayal. Thus, the medieval bed was both a cradle of kinship and a potential site of sin. The medieval night, in this sense, was never truly solitary. Whether among nobles surrounded by attendants or peasants curled together under coarse blankets, sleep was part of a collective rhythm. The darkness united all classes in a shared vulnerability. Beneath the same moon, kings and beggars closed their eyes to dream and to fear. When the medieval mind drifted into sleep, it entered not merely a realm of rest but a theater of symbols, messages, and mysteries. Dreams were never simply private fantasies. They were treated as communications from God, the saints, the devil, or the restless dead. To sleep was to risk revelation. The night opened a door to unseen realms, and dreams were the messengers that passed through it. Every class, from the learned cleric to the peasant by his hearth, shared a fascination with the meaning of dreams. A cobbler might wake and tell his wife that St. Nicholas had visited him, blessing his tools. A noble might dream of a hawk breaking free from its tether and consult a priest to learn whether it meant victory or betrayal. Even kings sought meaning in their sleep. Medieval chronicles record monarchs who took dreams as divine warnings. A shadow over the battlefield, a vision of fire, a voice crying in the dark. The medieval church faced an uneasy challenge. On the one hand, Scripture was full of dreams that carried holy truth, Joseph's visions, Daniel's prophecies, the dream of Pilate's wife. On the other hand, false dreams were considered dangerous. Theologians warned that demons could disguise themselves as angels and whisper deceit into a sleeper's ear. The church therefore divided dreams into three kinds: divine, natural, and demonic. Divine dreams came from God or his messengers, carrying revelation, comfort, or prophecy. These were rare and often given to the pure of heart. Natural dreams arose from the humors of the body, from digestion or fatigue. They were meaningless, the flickering of the senses, the echo of waking thoughts. But the third kind, demonic dreams, came from evil spirits who sought to deceive, tempt, or terrify. They could take the form of lustful visions, blasphemous images, or nightmares that left the sleeper gasping and pale. To tell the difference between these kinds was no easy task. Priests, monks, and even physicians became interpreters of dreams, applying both Holy Scripture and ancient philosophy. Many relied on the works of Macrobius, a Roman writer whose commentary on the dream of Scipio survived through the Middle Ages. He classified dreams into categories: prophetic, oracular, enigmatic, and false. The medieval scholar absorbed this system and fused it with Christian thought, transforming the pagan art of dream interpretation into a spiritual science. Dreams were thus both mystical and diagnostic. Physicians read them as signs of the body's balance. A burning dream indicated fever. Dreams of water suggested an excess of cold humors. Confessors, in turn, treated dreams as windows into the soul. To dream of sin might mean guilt unconfessed. To dream of light or heavenly voices was a sign of grace. The same dream could be read through two lenses, one bodily, one divine. The dream books, or somnialia, were among the most curious texts of the period. These were collections of interpretations, listing hundreds of dream symbols and their meanings. They circulated widely among both scholars and layfolk. A serpent meant treachery, a crown meant joy, a journey foretold death or salvation depending on its end. Such books were sometimes condemned as superstitious, but they remained popular especially among midwives, herbalists, and wise women who blended Christian belief with older, folkloric wisdom. For the common people, dreams were rarely abstract. They were woven into the rhythm of life, warnings, omens, or blessings that shaped daily decisions. A farmer might change the day of his harvest if he dreamed of a storm. A young woman might refuse a suitor if she dreamed of a black dog. In villages and markets, people told their dreams like stories, and each listener became an interpreter. Dreams were part of communal life, shared and debated as one shared gossip or weather signs. The nightmare, however, stood apart, the terror both physical and supernatural. To wake paralyzed, unable to breathe, feeling a weight pressing on the chest. This experience was well known. Medieval people called the creature responsible the Mara, a night hag or spirit that rode sleeping men and women. In England, it was called the nightmare, in Germany the Alp, in Scandinavia, the mare. The creature was said to slip through keyholes or sit upon sleepers, suffocating them with its demonic presence. Some believed it to be a witch in spirit form, others a demon sent by the devil, or the soul of a dead sinner seeking revenge. To protect themselves, sleepers turned to charms and prayers. A cross over the bed, a sprig of rue or st. John's wort under the pillow, a whispered paternoster before lying down. These small defenses turned the bed into a fortress of faith. Some even placed iron nails beneath their pillows, believing metal repelled spirits. The church, meanwhile, encouraged prayer and confession to cleanse the conscience, for it taught that the unrepentant were most vulnerable to nocturnal torment. But not all night visions were fearful. Many saints and mystics spoke of dreams filled with radiant light, voices of comfort, or visions of paradise. In the lives of the saints, holy men and women often received their calling in dreams. Saint Francis of Assisi dreamed of a vast hall filled with weapons marked with the cross, a sign that he was to lead soldiers of God. Saint Bernard saw Christ offering him a chalice. For such visionaries, dreams were not passive experiences but direct encounters with the divine. Dreams also served as instruments of moral instruction. Preachers used dream stories to teach humility and repentance. One popular tale told of a proud knight who mocked the poor, only to dream of the last judgment, where he saw himself weighed down by his sins. Upon waking, he gave away his fortune and became a monk. Such stories blurred the line between dream and parable. They taught that sleep could reveal what the waking mind refused to see. Even the afterlife was described in dreamlike terms. Medieval visions of heaven, hell, and purgatory, from the vision of Tyndale to the dream of the Rood, read like nocturnal journeys. The sleeper traveled beyond the world, guided by angels or demons, witnessing the fate of souls. These dream visions were both literary and devotional. They provided a moral map of the cosmos, turning private dreams into public lessons about salvation. In monasteries, dreams were sometimes recorded and circulated as evidence of divine intervention. When a monk dreamed that a brother's soul appeared asking for prayer, the community would gather to chant psalms for him. Dream sharing became a form of charity, a way of caring for the living and the dead alike. Yet such accounts also strengthened the sense that the veil between worlds was thin. and that each night sleepers stood perilously close to eternity. The more we look, the clearer it becomes that medieval dreams were not escapes from reality but extensions of it. They reflected a cosmos in which everything was symbolic, every event a sign, every moment bound to divine will. To dream was to participate in the mystery of creation, to glimpse, for a fleeting hour, what the waking eye could not bear to see. And yet, for all their sacredness, dreams remained deeply human. They revealed fear, desire, hunger, and love. They could be holy or sinful, healing or deceptive, luminous or dark. In them, the medieval person met not only angels and demons, but also themselves, their hidden thoughts, their secret hopes, their unconfessed guilt. The night in the Middle Ages was not a peaceful absence of light, it was a living, breathing realm of conflict. While the day belonged to work and worship, the night belonged to fear and temptation. As the candles guttered and the village fell silent, people believed a different world awoke. Spirits prowled, demons whispered, witches wandered the roads, and souls fought unseen battles within their dreams. Sleep, though necessary, was perilous. It was not merely a time to rest the body, it was a time to defend the soul. Medieval sermons and devotional texts spoke of night as the hour of testing. Evil, they said, preferred the dark. Satan and his legions, unable to bear the light of God, worked their mischief when the world slept. To fall asleep without prayer was to lay down one's arms before the enemy. Monks in monasteries rising for midnight matins described the hour as the time of war, when the righteous must stand guard while others slept. Night terrors were not understood as mere disturbances of the mind. They were assaults upon the soul. A man who awoke gasping, paralyzed or tormented by hideous visions was thought to have been visited by demons. These entities were not abstract symbols of fear, they were tangible forces in the medieval imagination. The night hag, the Mara or the incubus was said to sit upon the sleeper's chest, crushing breath and will. The victim might wake drenched in sweat, certain that something had been in the room, something heavy, cold, and hateful. Church authorities and physicians alike debated the cause of such horrors. Theologians saw them as the work of the devil, exploiting weak faith. Physicians trained in Galenic theory offered natural explanations that night terrors arose from indigestion, block humors, or excessive melancholy. Yet even physicians did not dismiss the supernatural entirely. The boundaries between body and spirit were porous. A corrupted body made the soul more vulnerable to demonic attack. Thus, a proper diet, good air, and moral discipline were all considered defenses against the night. Exorcisms were among the Church's responses to such terrors. If a person suffered repeated nightmares, visions, or nocturnal paralysis, priests might bless their bed, sprinkle holy water on the threshold, or recite psalms of protection. Some exorcists prescribed specific prayers, "Deliver me, O Lord, from the spirits of darkness who disturb my sleep." Others used relics or crosses near the pillow. It was believed that holy objects created a circle of light that demons could not cross. Lay people, too, developed their own arsenal of protection. A sprig of rosemary under the pillow kept away evil. Iron nails placed in the wall above the bed guarded against witches. The name of Christ carved on the bedpost acted as a ward. Sleep itself was prepared like a ritual, washing hands, crossing oneself, and saying the evening prayers known as Compline. A devout sleeper might murmur the Credo or the Ave Maria until their breathing slowed. The goal was to fall asleep in a state of grace, ready for either waking or death, for many feared they might never rise again. Yet not all terrors came from demons. Some nightmares were believed to arise from unconfessed sins. A guilty conscience could conjure horrors more vivid than any spirit. A thief might dream of burning chains, a murder of blood that would not wash away. Such dreams were taken as divine warnings, chances for repentance before damnation. Confessors often asked penitents about their dreams, believing that the soul revealed its truth in sleep. A recurring dream of darkness or drowning, they said, was the heart's cry for forgiveness. For others, the terror came not from their own sins but from the restless dead. Ghosts in the medieval world often visited sleepers, appearing at bedsides to plead for prayers or to accuse the living. Some monks recorded tales of souls from purgatory who came at night, surrounded by fire, begging for masses to be said in their name. In many villages, it was said that the newly dead walked 3 nights before finding peace. To meet such a ghost in one's sleep was terrifying, yet also sacred. It was a call to mercy, a reminder that even the dead depended on the living's compassion. Women were thought especially vulnerable to nocturnal visitation. The incubus, a demon who seduced women in their sleep, haunted the imagination of theologians and folk alike. The Malleus Maleficarum, written in the late 15th century, devoted grim pages to such tales, describing how witches consorted with spirits in dreams, giving birth to monstrous offspring. Behind this fear lay a deeper anxiety about the body, desire, and control. Sleep made all people vulnerable, but especially women, whose nocturnal experiences could be read as proof of both spiritual weakness and hidden power. In monasteries, too, night terrors took on spiritual significance. Monks who dreamt of demons often interpreted them as tests from God. The cloister was no safe haven from temptation. The rule of St. Benedict warned brothers to guard even their dreams, to purify the heart so that no evil vision might find a home. The night cell, lit only by flickering lamps, was a battlefield where humility and temptation wrestled in silence. Some monks, fearing dreams of lust or pride, slept little, choosing instead to chant softly or meditate upon scripture until dawn. The belief that the night was a moral frontier created a culture of vigilance. In castles, guards patrolled the ramparts not only to ward off thieves but to keep watch against evil influences. In cottages, mothers prayed over their children, tracing crosses on their foreheads. The household fire was kept alive through the night, symbolizing the light of faith holding back darkness. To let it die was a bad omen, a sign that evil might enter. Stories of nocturnal battles circulated everywhere. Chroniclers told of saints who fought demons in their sleep, emerging at dawn radiant and unscathed. One monk dreamed that Satan appeared as a black lion, roaring in his face. He awoke with claw marks on his chest, proof, he claimed, that the struggle was real. Whether literal or symbolic, such tales spoke to a deep truth of the age, that sleep itself was a spiritual trial. Even those who did not see visions believed that night tested the soul's endurance. To sleep without prayer was dangerous. To sleep after sin was reckless. But to sleep in peace, to entrust oneself wholly to God, was an act of faith. It meant believing that, even in darkness, divine light stood guard. This idea was expressed beautifully in a common evening prayer of the period. Protect us, Lord, as we lie awake. Watch over us as we sleep, that awake we may keep watch with Christ, and asleep rest in his peace. These words echoed through monasteries and cottages alike, uniting all sleepers, poor and rich, fearful and faithful, in a single hope, that the night would pass without harm, and that the soul would awaken renewed. As the centuries turned, the Church began to codify these beliefs into ritual, merging fear and faith into a theology of rest. But while religion provided answers, the darkness never lost its mystery. The medieval night was both enemy and companion, both testing ground and sanctuary. In the Middle Ages, dreams were not simple flights of fancy or random fragments of thought. They were bridges, sacred, perilous bridges, between the visible and invisible worlds. To dream was to step into a realm where souls, angels, and demons mingled freely, where the veil separating the living from the dead thinned to gossamer. Sleep was never fully safe. It could bring a message from God or a whisper from the devil. It could reveal one's destiny or deliver temptation. To close one's eyes at night was, in a sense, to open them to eternity. The medieval understanding of dreams drew upon a complex inheritance. From the ancient Greeks came the idea that dreams could foretell the future, the legacy of Artemidorus and his one-ear Critica. a dream manual still known in learned circles. From the Bible came the conviction that dreams were one of the means through which God communicated with humankind. Joseph, who interpreted Pharaoh's visions. Daniel, who saw beasts and empires in his sleep. The angelic warning to the Magi in a dream. And from the church fathers came caution, for not all dreams came from heaven. St. Augustine and Gregory the Great warned that many dreams were the work of the flesh or of demons. The sleeping body, unguarded, was vulnerable to illusion. What seemed a vision might be temptation in disguise. To discern the difference between a divine dream and a diabolical one was the task of spiritual wisdom, and often the Church's authority. Thus, dream interpretation was not a private matter. If a monk or a nun dreamt something strange, they would confess it to their superior. A noble who dreamed of death or triumph might call for a priest to interpret it, according to scripture and moral order. Dreams of saints and angels were treated with reverence. Hagiographies, the biographies of saints, are filled with accounts of holy visions that came at night. Saint Benedict, while sleeping in his cell, saw the entire world gathered in a single ray of light. Saint Francis of Assisi was visited in dreams by Christ himself, instructing him to rebuild the church. For the devout, such dreams were tokens of grace, affirmations of divine favor. They were not to be doubted but recorded, meditated upon, and shared. Yet alongside these shining dreams were darker ones, visions of sin, terror, and torment. Demons, medieval theologians taught, could invade the mind through the senses, and sleep left the soul unguarded. The night, especially the hours before dawn, was their favored time. People spoke of being pressed upon by invisible forces, of suffocating weight upon the chest. What we now call sleep paralysis was known then as the incubus. This creature was thought to be a demon, often of lust, who visited sleepers to corrupt them. Such experiences were terrifying proof of the devil's reach into the mortal world. The line between spiritual experience and nightmare was thin. A dream might begin with a saintly figure and end with monstrous distortion. Was it an angel disguising itself as human, or a demon pretending to be divine? Medieval manuals of confession advised the faithful to judge their dreams by their fruits. If a dream led to humility, repentance, or renewed faith, it was likely from God. If it stirred pride, fear, or desire, it was likely from hell. Ordinary people had their own ways of interpreting dreams. In villages and towns, folk dream books circulated in secret, written in Latin or vernacular tongues. They listed hundreds of symbols and their meanings. To dream of a river foretold travel, to see a snake warned of deceit, to eat sweet fruit promised joy, to lose a tooth foretold a death in the family. Though condemned by the church as superstitious, such manuals persisted, blending pagan tradition with Christian belief. Dreams could also serve as omens in public life. Kings and generals sometimes made crucial decisions based on nocturnal visions. Chroniclers tell of rulers who saw crowns fall from their heads or swords break in two, portents of impending doom. Before the Norman invasion of England, William the Conqueror reportedly dreamed of a tree growing from his chest, its branches covering all of Europe. For the medieval mind, the sleeping soul was capable of seeing beyond the present moment into the divine pattern of history. But dreams were not only cosmic or prophetic, they were deeply personal and moral. Many confessors believed that what one dreamed revealed the state of one's soul. A lustful dream indicated impurity. A violent dream, anger or envy. Even involuntary dreams could be grounds for repentance, as they showed the stains of temptation upon the heart. Thus, sleep itself became a form of moral testing. Every morning, upon waking, the faithful were urged to examine what they had seen in the night and to pray for protection from spiritual deceit. For monks and nuns, this vigilance was constant. Their cloisters were not only places of prayer but also battlegrounds of the subconscious. Monastic writings speak of dreams filled with terrifying images, monstrous faces, strange voices, or alluring figures sent to shake their vows. The rule of Saint Benedict instructed monks to guard their minds as they guarded their eyes, for Satan's attacks were subtle. To dream of pleasure or ambition was to risk sin even in sleep. For that reason, many monks recited psalms before bed, asking God to set a watch before my mouth, and keep the door of my lips, not only against words, but against dreams. Women, too, occupied a special place in medieval dream culture, because they were thought to be more emotional and spiritually sensitive. Their dreams were sometimes valued as revelations, and sometimes dismissed as delusion. Visionary women like Hildegard of Bingen and Julian of Norwich, however, transformed this perception. Their recorded visions, experienced in sleep or trance, became theological masterpieces. Hildegard described luminous, living light and heard music that no human ear could perceive. Julian dreamt of Christ bleeding into her hands, teaching her the meaning of divine love. These were not dreams in the ordinary sense. They were mystical sleep, in which God used the stillness of the body to awaken the soul. At the same time, the Church warned against false visionaries. Women accused of witchcraft or heresy were sometimes charged with claiming false dreams. If a woman said that spirits spoke to her at night, she risked suspicion unless her visions conformed to orthodoxy. The inquisitors' manuals of the 14th and 15th centuries mention cases where dreams were used as evidence of demonic influence. What had once been seen as a potential path to divine truth could, in darker times, become grounds for persecution. Among the common folk, dreams remained woven into the rhythms of daily life. A mother might dream of a cradle overturning and fear for her child's safety. A farmer might dream of black clouds over his fields and delay his planting. People shared their dreams at breakfast as seriously as they shared the weather. The phrase "a dream is a shadow of truth" was a proverb across much of Europe. Even sleep itself carried sacred meaning. Before lying down, Christians often said the prayer, "I will lay me down in peace, and take my rest, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety." The bed was a symbol of both rest and mortality, a rehearsal for death, when the soul would depart the body. Hence, to dream well was to live rightly. To dream in sin was to die in peril. Night, then, was never empty. It was alive with messages, tests, and revelations. The dream world mirrored the moral universe. Every image, every whisper had consequence. Medieval people believed that God could speak through sleep, but they also knew the devil could counterfeit his voice. Between those two truths lay the fragile territory of the human soul, forever listening, forever interpreting, forever uncertain. For medieval people, sleep was far more than a biological necessity. It was a sacred act, a ritual that linked the body to the soul and the soul to eternity. To close one's eyes at night was to surrender oneself to God's will. It was a rehearsal for death and a hope for resurrection. Every night, as darkness fell, life and death drew near to one another, and in that space between wakefulness and oblivion, medieval Christians found both fear and faith. In the dim glow of a candle, a peasant might kneel beside his straw bed, murmuring the same words he had heard since childhood. "Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." The phrase, taken from the Psalms and echoed by Christ upon the cross, was whispered by millions as they prepared for sleep. It was not merely a prayer for protection from nightmares or thieves. It was a declaration of trust, a willing surrender of one's life to divine mercy. Should death come in the night, the soul would already be placed in God's keeping. The act of going to bed itself followed a pattern of devotion. The bedchamber, simple or grand, became a miniature chapel. In castles, a crucifix hung above the bed, and holy water was kept nearby. In cottages, a carved cross or an icon of the Virgin might serve the same role. Before lying down, families made the sign of the cross over themselves and over the bed. Some sprinkled the sheets with blessed salt or recited the Ave Maria. Children were taught to say, "If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." This was not morbid. It was a simple acceptance of the fragility of life. Sleep was also a form of spiritual imitation. Monks and nuns modeled their rest on biblical example. In monasteries, after the final service of Compline, they would retire in silence. The lights dimmed, the cloister fell still. Each monk lay on a narrow bed or a wooden board, often fully clothed, as a reminder of humility and readiness for death. They slept with their heads turned toward the altar, symbolizing the resurrection at the end of time. Many refused soft bidding, believing comfort invited sloth. In some orders, monks rose again at midnight for the service of matins. To interrupt their sleep was to share in the vigilance of Christ in Gethsemane. The medieval church taught that the soul remained active during sleep, while the body rested. The spirit could pray, reflect, or even suffer purgation. The notion that a sleeper's thoughts might continue as prayers was comforting. It meant that devotion never ceased. Sleep thus became part of one's spiritual discipline. Just as fasting trained the body to serve the soul, proper sleeping habits reflected the harmony between flesh and faith. Oversleeping, on the other hand, was considered a vice, acedia, or sloth. It dulled the senses and tempted the spirit into apathy. Medieval physicians also connected sleep to morality. They believed the humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, were purified through balanced rest. Too little sleep led to anger or melancholy, too much bred weakness. Physicians recommended moderate hours, ideally timed to the movement of the sun. The moral lesson was clear. Virtue lay in moderation. To sleep correctly was to live rightly. There was another layer of symbolism that fascinated theologians and poets alike. Sleep, as the twin of death, they were bound together by mystery. Just as sleep came without warning and drew one into stillness, so death would one day close the eyes forever. But unlike death, sleep was followed by awakening, the daily resurrection that foreshadowed the last day. Each morning, to open one's eyes was to experience, in miniature, the miracle of rebirth. This belief shaped how people viewed dying itself. The ideal death, the good death, or ars moriendi, resembled falling asleep in faith. The dying person was surrounded by candles, prayers, and loved ones, their final words echoing the bedtime prayer. Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. To die peacefully was to fall asleep in the Lord. Medieval tombs often depicted the deceased lying as if in gentle slumber, hands folded, faces serene. Their stone effigies were eternal sleepers, awaiting the trumpet of resurrection. In literature and art, sleep was depicted as both holy and dangerous. Poets spoke of the soft death of night and the angel's rest. Illuminated manuscripts showed angels watching over sleeping figures, their wings folded like blankets of light. But they also warned of the temptations that visited sleepers, demons whispering false dreams, the sins of idleness, or the moral peril of indulgence. To sleep too much, or to seek pleasure in bed beyond the purpose of rest, was seen as giving the devil a foothold. Thus, even the most private act of sleep carried moral weight. Among the common people, sleep was deeply communal. Families often shared beds, and warmth was a shared blessing. In winter, parents, children, and even servants might lie together under heavy wool or fur. The hearth's dying embers glowed faintly, and the world outside, wolves, wind, and wandering spirits, was held at bay by closeness. Before drifting into dreams, families might recite stories of saints who slept under God's protection. The idea that angels stood watch over sleepers was a comfort to all. In towns and cities, night watchmen walked the streets, their torches flickering like stars brought to earth. Their calls reminded people that time itself was moving past midnight, and all's well, a rhythm that linked the sleeping community. Churches rang bells at the canonical hours, and even those who slept heard them faintly, their dreams touched by sacred sound. The entire city, from beggar to bishop, shared in a single breathing cycle of night. Sleep was also linked to healing. The word restoration carried both physical and spiritual meaning. It was believed that God worked through sleep to mend the body as well as the soul. Some monasteries kept special beds for the sick where monks would read psalms aloud until the patient drifted off. Certain herbs, lavender, valerian, and chamomile, were burned or steeped in warm baths to calm troubled sleepers. These remedies were considered not merely medicinal but holy, gifts of divine mercy hidden in nature. Yet there were also those who feared sleep, insomniacs tormented by anxiety, guilt, or the sense of unseen presences. The inability to sleep was sometimes viewed as punishment or possession. Priests might be called to bless the bed or sprinkle holy water upon the pillow. A candle burned through the night was thought to drive away demons. In some regions, people carved protective symbols into bed frames, crosses, stars, or the initials of Christ, to guard against the nocturnal assault of evil spirits. The very language of sleep became a way to speak of eternity. In sermons, priests reminded their congregations that this life was a single night before the dawn of resurrection. "We sleep in the grave as in a bed," one preacher said, awaiting the morning when the sun shall wake us. The metaphors of sleep and death intertwined so deeply that they shaped Christian burial customs. Cemeteries were called God's fields, and the dead were said to be sown in sleep until they rose again. In every sense, the medieval night was not a void but a sacred interval. The world rested in the hands of its creator, and each sleeper mirrored that cosmic trust. To sleep was to acknowledge one's smallness before God. To awaken was to taste his mercy anew. Between the two lay mystery, silence, and grace. And so, when dawn finally came, when the first light touched the rooftops, when the rooster's crow pierced the fading stars, it was more than morning. It was a renewal of faith, the daily resurrection. Life continued, fragile and bright, born again from the womb of night. If sleep was a sacred surrender, then wakefulness in the night was a sacred struggle. The hours after midnight, when most of the world lay still, when even the wind seemed to hush, were seen by medieval people as the time when heaven and hell stood closest to earth. It was then that monks rose from their narrow beds to chant psalms, that mystics kept vigil by candlelight, that peasants whispered prayers against evil. To remain awake in the dark was both a test and a weapon, an act of defiance against the forces that prowled unseen. The practice of night vigils lay at the heart of monastic life. In the great abbeys of Cluny, Chartres, and Canterbury, bells rang deep in the night, summoning the brethren from their sleep. They rose silently, often in cold so biting that their breath clouded in the air, and filed into the chapel carrying small lamps. The sound of their sandals on the stone floor echoed like a heartbeat through the cloisters. Then, in voices low but unwavering, they began to chant the ancient psalms. "In the night I have remembered thy name, O Lord, and have kept thy law." These vigils were not merely rituals. They were a form of spiritual warfare. The night belonged, in many minds, to the devil. To stay awake was to keep watch like the shepherds at Bethlehem or the apostles in Gethsemane. Monks called themselves Milites Christi, soldiers of Christ, and the dark hours were their battlefield. Every psalm sung was a weapon, every prayer a defense. The flickering candles became fortresses of light in the encroaching shadow. Yet the vigil was not confined to monasteries. Across medieval Europe, people kept watch for many reasons. Villagers might stay awake to guard livestock from wolves or thieves. Sailors watched the stars to keep their ships on course. Mothers watched over sick children, whispering the Lord's Prayer with every labored breath. These were vigils of necessity, born of care and fear, and in them, ordinary people felt themselves joined to the same spiritual current that flowed through the cloisters, a communion of the sleepless, united by purpose. There were also ritual vigils, formal and solemn, tied to the rhythms of faith. Before great feasts, knights and nobles would hold vigils of prayer, confessing their sins and preparing their souls for combat. The night before being dubbed a knight was especially sacred. The young warrior would bathe, dress in white, and kneel in a church all night, sword laid upon the altar, keeping watch in imitation of Christ before his passion. It was both initiation and purification. a transformation in darkness before the dawn of honor. The same idea extended to funeral vigils. When someone died, their body was not left alone. Family, neighbors, and clergy gathered to watch over the dead through the night, praying for the soul's safe passage and warding off evil spirits that might seek to claim it. Candles burned constantly, and psalms were recited without pause. It was said that the devil prowled especially close to the newly dead, hoping to snatch the soul before it reached God's light. Thus, to keep vigil was both an act of love and of protection. Vigils were also kept for the sick and the dying. In huts, cottages, and manors alike, those who stayed awake beside a deathbed performed a holy duty. They sang hymns, read from the book of Psalms, or simply held the dying person's hand. When exhaustion overcame them, they traded places with another watcher. Through the long, slow hours of night, these shared vigils became living symbols of faith enduring against despair. The theology of vigilance ran deep. The Gospels spoke again and again of the need to watch and pray, for no one knew the hour of the Lord's coming. The parable of the wise and foolish virgins, those who kept their lamps filled with oil and those who let them go dark, was a favorite of preachers. To fall asleep spiritually was to risk eternal loss. Hence, physical wakefulness became a metaphor for readiness of the soul. The lamp that burns through the night was the lamp of faith, and the oil that feeds it was good works. The night vigil was, therefore, a paradox. Though the body grew weary, the spirit was awakened. Mystics described the deep hours of the night as the time when divine presence was most tangible. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux wrote that in silence and darkness, the soul hears the voice of God. The absence of noise, the stillness of air, and the dim shimmer of candlelight created a space where the invisible could be felt. Some monks claimed to see faint lights, not of this world, flicker above the altar, or to hear angelic choirs faintly joining their psalms. But not all vigil experiences were serene. There were visions of terror too. Some monks confessed to seeing shadowy figures moving through the cloister, faces without eyes or dark wings brushing their shoulders. The night was a mirror of the soul. Whatever lingered within would emerge. A monk burdened with doubt might hear mocking voices in the wind. Another, pure in heart, might perceive radiant light. The vigil exposed every hidden fear, every weakness. That was precisely its purpose, to strip away illusion and test faith in the raw silence of the dark. Among layfolk, the vigil sometimes took on a communal or festive form. Before great church feasts, villagers gathered in churches or churchyards to pray through the night. They lit candles, sang hymns, and sometimes told pious tales to keep drowsiness at bay. In some places, these gatherings became rowdy. Priests complained of laughter, games, even drunkenness during holy vigils. Yet, despite such excess, the idea remained: to keep watch while the world slept was to show devotion. Even those who could not stay awake sought ways to symbolically participate in the eternal vigil. Candles left burning through the night were offerings of light to God. Some households kept a lamp burning before an image of the Virgin or a saint, believing it kept demons away. The flame represented both prayer and presence, the sign that faith did not slumber even when eyes did. The vigil had another, more mystical meaning. It was a confrontation with the self. Alone in darkness, deprived of sleep, the mind wandered through its own depths. Thoughts once hidden in daylight emerged with startling clarity. Sins long forgotten reappeared, along with fears, memories, and hopes. To watch through the night was to face oneself under the gaze of God. Some monks spoke of the vigil as a form of inner cleansing, an ordeal that burned away pride and left the soul transparent. As dawn approached, the vigil ended not with exhaustion but with renewal. The first light creeping through stained glass, the cold air tinged with gold, the final psalm rising into morning, these were moments of profound joy. The vigil was never meant to last forever. It always gave way to day as struggle gave way to grace. The monks' chant of lauds celebrated the coming of the sun and the triumph of light over darkness. It was a daily resurrection. the reward for faithfulness through the night. Outside the cloister, ordinary people mirrored this rhythm. Farmers who rose before sunrise to milk their cows or tend their fields were, in their own way, participating in the cosmic vigil. Their work began while stars still shone, their labor sanctified by its harmony with creation's cycles. The blacksmith's first hammer strike, the baker's first loaf rising in the oven, all became echoes of that same truth. The night's purpose was to prepare for morning. The night vigil thus united every level of medieval life. Monk and peasant, noble and beggar, saint and sinner. It was the shared conviction that darkness was not to be feared but faced. In the silence between midnight and dawn, the human spirit proved its endurance, and the promise of light was renewed again and again. And so, when the first rays of the sun finally touched the cloister walls or the village roofs, those who had kept watch felt a quiet triumph. They had guarded the world through its most perilous hours. They had held the line between despair and hope. The darkness had not won. When the sun sank below the horizon in the Middle Ages, it wasn't merely the world that darkened. It was the soul's defenses. People believed that once the light was gone, the devil and his legions roamed freely. The night belonged to him, and sleep was a dangerous threshold where one might slip into his grasp. It was the time of testing, temptation, and terror. For monks, peasants, and nobles alike, night was not neutral. It had a moral weight, a spiritual gravity. Daytime was the realm of labor and law when reason and order prevailed. But the night, oh the night, was chaos unbound. It was said that the mind, freed from the discipline of daylight, became vulnerable. Thoughts that were banished by the sun crept back in whispers. Lust, envy, despair, and doubt all awoke when the world slept. Monastic writings are filled with warnings about these nightly temptations. The devil, they said, was a master of subtlety. He didn't always appear in monstrous form. More often, he came as a whisper, an image, a dream. A monk might see the face of a beautiful woman, or imagine a feast laid before him while he fasted. Others heard mocking laughter or felt invisible hands touch them in the dark. These were tests of purity, or traps for the weak. In the dialogues of Saint Gregory the Great, there is a chilling account of a monk who was tempted in his sleep by visions of pleasure. When he awoke, he was filled with shame and despair. His abbot told him that the devil sought not just to seduce, but to accuse, to convince the sinner that he was already damned. That was the true danger of night, not the dream itself, but the despair that followed. Sleep and sin were intimately connected in medieval thought. The body at rest was open, passive, vulnerable, and therefore easy prey. One theologian compared it to a door left unlatched. The devil did not need to break in. He simply entered when the soul grew careless. This is why monks often slept lightly or not at all, waking repeatedly to pray. Some even slept sitting up, wrapped in rough wool, so as not to indulge in comfort that might lead to temptation. The rule of Saint Benedict prescribes strict routines to combat these dangers. Silence after compline, the final prayer of the evening, was absolute. Talking, laughing, or wandering after dark was forbidden. Let each return to his bed, the rule said, and let all sleep in one place with lamps burning until morning. The light symbolized vigilance. It also, quite literally, kept the shadows away. Among layfolk, fear of the night's demonic powers was equally strong. Peasants told stories of nightmares that pressed upon the chest, demonic beings called Mara, Alp, or Incubus that suffocated sleepers. These entities were blamed for everything from sleep paralysis to sudden death in the night. People hung crosses above their beds or placed sprigs of herbs, especially St. John's wort or vervain, under their pillows to ward off such attacks. Some prayers were written specifically for nighttime protection. One popular charm began, "In the name of the Father who guards my soul, the Son who lights my way, and the Holy Ghost who shields my sleep." Such invocations were whispered before lying down, repeated 3 times, or murmured over a candle flame before blowing it out. The bed became a small fortress of faith, surrounded by invisible walls of prayer. Dreams themselves were viewed with suspicion, while some were believed to carry divine messages, as in the dreams of Joseph or Daniel. Most were seen as tricks of the devil or illusions of the flesh. Medieval dream manuals, like the Somnia Evangelis, tried to separate the sacred from the sinful, offering cryptic interpretations. Dreaming of water meant trouble, of fire, passion, of flight, pride. But even these guides warned that not all dreams should be trusted. The devil, one text cautioned, paints false visions in the mind as a painter upon glass. Yet for all their fear, people also found ways to fight back. Faith was their weapon. The night may have been the devil's realm, but it was not his alone. Saints and angels were thought to patrol the darkness, and those who called upon them with pure hearts could drive away even the most cunning tempter. The Virgin Mary, in particular, was seen as a protector of sleepers. Her image hung in countless bedrooms, her name whispered as the last word before sleep. Certain relics were also prized for their power against nocturnal evil. A fragment of a saint's bone, a drop of holy water, a consecrated candle, all were shields in the invisible war. In monasteries, relics were sometimes placed beneath the pillows of monks suffering from tormented dreams. There are records of abbots ordering entire dormitories to be sprinkled with holy water after reports of demonic disturbances. The mental torment of the night was not limited to monks or peasants. Kings and scholars suffered it too. Chroniclers tell of rulers who awoke screaming from nightmares of judgment, or who kept their chambers lit all night out of fear. The great philosopher Thomas Aquinas wrote that in the silence of night, the mind contemplates its own abyss. Night stripped away distraction, forcing the soul to confront itself, and what it found was often terrifying. The devil's power in medieval eyes lay not only in his ability to frighten but to distort perception. He could make the familiar seem monstrous, the real seem unreal. Shadows became faces, wind became whispers. The lonely mind filled the void with horrors of its own making. But the Church taught that these illusions had one weakness: they could not withstand the name of Christ. Thus, every Christian was armed with a simple but potent defense: prayer. In the hour of darkness, said Saint Bernard, let the heart speak the name, and the shadow shall flee. The repetition of holy words acted like a rhythm of the soul, steady, bright, unyielding. For many, it was not just faith but survival. And sometimes, the victory came through endurance. When monks kept their vigils, when peasants whispered prayers through storm and fear, when widows lit candles in lonely rooms, they were not merely protecting themselves. They were asserting that light, however small, was stronger than the abyss. By dawn, the devil's reign ended. The cock crowed, and with it came relief. The people believed that no demon could remain once the first rays of sunlight touched the earth. The return of morning was itself a kind of exorcism, the triumph of order over chaos, of God over night. But the memory of those dark hours lingered. It served as a warning and a lesson that every human soul must endure its own midnight, and that faith was the lamp meant to carry it through. As much as the night inspired fear in the medieval imagination, it was also a time for restoration and healing. Beyond its shadows and whispers, sleep was recognized as a gift, a divine mercy granted to the weary body and troubled mind. Medieval thinkers saw it not simply as a natural need but as a spiritual and medical instrument, capable of mending what the day had broken. To fall asleep peacefully was to be embraced by divine order. To awaken refreshed was to rise, renewed by grace. Physicians of the Middle Ages, drawing upon classical sources such as Galen and Avicenna, believed that sleep played a central role in the balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much wakefulness dried and overheated the body, while too much sleep dampened and weakened it. The key, they said, was moderation. The night, properly managed, was a time to revel in the inner harmony through warmth, rest, and careful nourishment. To encourage healthy sleep, physicians recommended specific regimens, light meals before bed, gentle conversation, and avoidance of strong emotions. Anger, lust, and worry were to be banished from the mind before retiring. The ancient physicians, wrote one medieval text, command that none go to bed in wrath or heaviness, for such passions stir the humors and vex the heart. Sleep was to be prepared for as one might prepare for prayer, with calmness, cleansing, and humility. For those who struggled with restlessness or insomnia, remedies abounded. The herbal tradition of medieval Europe offered countless cures. A common sleep draught contained valerian poppy and lettuce steeped in warm wine or milk. Chamomile was used to calm the mind, while lavender, burned or tucked into pillows, soothed anxiety. The Taculum Sanitatis, a 14th century health manual, praised lettuce soup as an evening meal that softens the heat of the heart and invites tranquil slumber. In monasteries, herbs were cultivated as part of daily healing practice. The infirmer, the monk responsible for care of the sick, prepared teas, salves, and infusions for those tormented by sleeplessness. The beds of the infirmary were filled with the gentle scents of rosemary and sage, thought to purify the air and repel evil spirits. Patients were often read to before sleep passages from the Psalms or the lives of the saints, so that their dreams would be filled with holy images rather than temptation. For many, the distinction between medicine and miracle was thin. Sleep itself could be a divine visitation, a channel through which healing flowed directly from heaven. Chronicles and hagiographies tell of men and women who, after nights of prayer and tears, fell into deep, luminous sleep and awoke cured of affliction. These were called healing sleeps, moments when the soul and body met in the presence of the sacred. At shrines across Europe, such as those of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury or St. Martin in Tours, pilgrims sought incubation, the ancient practice of sleeping within a holy place to receive divine healing through dreams. Pilgrims lay on straw mats near relics or altars, often after fasting or bathing in blessed water. The night watch of the saints was said to bring dreams of luminous figures, healing touch, or whispered words of promise. Some awoke with their ailments gone, others with visions guiding them to the cure. A striking example appears in a 12th century account of St. Cuthbert's shrine. A woman suffering from paralysis spent a night within the cathedral, praying for release. As she drifted into sleep, she dreamed of the saint touching her shoulder and bidding her rise. When dawn came, she found herself standing, her body light and free. In that sleep, wrote the chronicler, her faith made whole what flesh could not. Even outside the great shrines, ordinary people sought healing dreams. In rural villages, wise women and herbalists taught rituals to invite true sleep. Before bed, one might wash the hands and face with infused water of marjoram, recite the Lord's Prayer, and lay one's head toward the east, the direction of resurrection and dawn. If a dream came, its meaning was pondered in the morning. Was it sent by God or by the wandering spirits of the night? The answer determined whether herbs or prayers would follow. Music and sound also played a role in medieval night remedies. Monastic chant, soft string instruments, or the rhythmic recitation of psalms were believed to harmonize the soul and the senses. The vibrations of sacred words, it was said, quieted the restless heart. In hospitals and cloisters alike, the singing of compline, the final prayer of the day, created an atmosphere of deep stillness. In pace, in idipsum dormium et requiescam, they sang in peace, I will lie down and sleep. It was both a prayer and a prescription. In the households of the wealthy, beds themselves became part of the art of healing. A noble's chamber might include finely woven linens, perfumed oils, and carved talismans inscribed with verses. The placement of the bed was guided by both theology and astrology. It should face east under auspicious planetary influence to ensure health and spiritual protection. Some beds had small niches for holy relics or icons, silent guardians for the dreaming soul. Yet even the humblest peasant understood that sleep was sacred. After long days of toil, a night's rest was not merely physical recovery but a participation in divine rhythm, the cycle of labor and rest established by God Himself. The Bible's reassurance that He gives His beloved sleep, Psalm 127, echoed through sermons and songs, reminding all that slumber was not weakness but grace. There was, too, a sense that the quality of one's dreams could reveal one's spiritual health. A person plagued by dark, violent visions might be suffering not from demonic attack alone but from guilt, imbalance, or sin. Confession, fasting, and prayer were recommended as cures alongside herbal tonics. In this way, medieval healing was always holistic. Body, soul, and spirit were inseparable. Many healers and clerics believed that the best sleep came after acts of forgiveness. To hold anger, they said, was to invite restless spirits. "Let no man sleep in hatred," warned a 13th century preacher, "for the devil sups with him that doth." The nightly act of reconciliation, even if only whispered in prayer, was a remedy more potent than any potion. In literature and art, healing sleep was a recurring motif. The poet Dante described sleep as the second innocence of man, while medieval painters often depicted the Virgin Mary watching over sleepers with outstretched hands. The act of sleeping was not only natural but theological, a symbol of trust, surrender, and divine mercy. Thus, for all the dangers of night, medieval people also saw in it a reflection of the divine order, darkness as the prelude to light, sleep as the threshold of healing, dreams as whispers of eternity. The same night that housed demons also held angels. The same silence that frightened the sinner soothed the believer. To the medieval mind, sleep and death were intimately intertwined, not merely as poetic metaphor, but as spiritual reality. The night was not just the time of rest. It was the rehearsal of the end, a miniature version of humanity's final sleep. Every night a person closed their eyes. They entered a state that mirrored death's silence and mystery. Yet in that same stillness, there was hope. As morning followed darkness, so too would resurrection follow death. The language of the Middle Ages reflects this belief. To fall asleep was a common euphemism for dying, rooted in the Bible itself. He slept with his fathers, 1 Kings 10. Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, John 11:11. Sermons, poems, and epitaphs echoed this imagery. The grave was called the bed of rest, the coffin a chamber of slumber. Even the tomb was sometimes built to resemble a bed, complete with carved pillows or reclining effigies of the deceased. The idea was clear: death was sleep under the watchful eye of God, awaiting the dawn of Judgment Day. Monks and theologians meditated deeply on this parallel. Each evening, as the monastic day closed with Compline, the community recited the prayer, "Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." It was the same phrase Christ spoke upon the cross, and for the monks, it served as a nightly surrender of life itself. To sleep was to die to the world for a few hours, entrusting one's soul to divine keeping. To awaken was a resurrection, small, daily proof of God's mercy. This theology of nightly death shaped both ritual and behavior. Before bed, medieval Christians examined their consciences as if preparing for final judgment. They confessed sins, forgave wrongs, and prayed for a clean soul. The bedchamber, dimly lit by a single candle, became a private chapel. The act of lying down mirrored the descent into the grave, and covering oneself with a blanket symbolized burial. Yet beneath this solemnity was also serenity. For the faithful, death held no terror, only transition. A popular prayer before sleep, preserved in many manuscripts, captured this duality. "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray thee, Lord, my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray thee, Lord, my soul to take." Though familiar to modern ears in its later form, this simple rhyme had deep medieval roots. It expressed both fear and faith, fear of the night's uncertainty, and faith that God watched through the darkness. Children were taught to say it, nobles whispered it in candlelight, and monks chanted longer versions during their vigils. Dreams of death and resurrection also filled the medieval imagination. People believed that sometimes the soul truly departed the body during sleep, traveling through spiritual realms. The 12th century text Visiot Nagdali describes the journey of a sleeping knight's soul through purgatory and paradise, witnessing the torments of sinners and the joys of the blessed. Upon awakening, he repented and reformed his life, proof, in the eyes of readers, that the boundaries between dream and eternity were porous. Such visionary experiences were not limited to saints or mystics. Chronicles and letters include countless accounts of ordinary people who dreamed of deceased relatives, angels, or the Virgin Mary. These visions were not dismissed as mere imagination but treated as messages from beyond, reminders of the thin veil separating life from death. A dream of one's dead mother smiling was seen as a sign of peace, one of her weeping, a warning of sin unconfessed. The physical position of sleep itself carried symbolic meaning. It was customary to lie facing east, toward the direction of the rising sun, and, by extension, the coming of Christ on the day of resurrection. Graves, too, were aligned eastward for the same reason. To awaken facing the dawn was to enact, every morning, the promise of eternal life. Medieval art reinforced this theology. In illuminated manuscripts, the sleeping Christ child often mirrors the pose of the dead Christ in the tomb, a reminder that even the innocence of sleep foreshadowed the passion. Tomb sculptures depicted knights and nobles lying peacefully, hands clasped in prayer, as if merely napping until the trumpet of the Last Judgment. In cathedrals, carvings of angels were placed at the heads of effigies, ready to rouse the sleepers when the world awoke anew. Funeral rites and nighttime prayers also reflected the link between death and rest. The Office of the Dead, recited by monks in candlelight, used the refrain, Requiem aeternam donois, Domini, grant them eternal rest, O Lord. The very word requiem derives from requies, meaning rest. To wish the dead rest in peace was not a metaphor but a literal hope that their souls, like weary travelers, had finally found divine slumber. Interestingly, medieval medicine echoed this theology in its own language. Physicians often described sleep as the brother of death, necessary but perilous. Too much could dull the spirits, too little could unbalance the humors. Death, they wrote, was simply sleep that did not end. One anonymous 13th century doctor remarked, "He who sleeps well lives long, he who sleeps eternally is at peace." The psychological comfort of this belief cannot be overstated. In a world where mortality was ever present, war, plague, childbirth, famine, the idea that each night's rest rehearsed resurrection brought solace. To die was to sleep under God's care. To awaken was to be reborn. Parents taught their children not to fear the dark, but to see it as part of divine order. Day and night, life and death always turning in rhythm. Mystical writers like Hildegard of Bingen and Julian of Norwich expanded this symbolism into cosmic scale. They described creation itself as a great breathing, light and dark alternating like inhale and exhale, all sustained by God's love. Sleep was the soul's participation in that rhythm, a sign of harmony with divine design. When man sleepeth, wrote Hildegard, his soul wandereth among the stars, and beholdeth the works of God. Yet, as always in medieval thought, comfort was balanced with caution. The night remained dangerous for the unrepentant. A person dying in sleep without confession risked the fires of purgatory. To fall asleep in sin was to risk awakening in torment. This fear inspired the custom of keeping blessed candles burning at night, so that if death came suddenly, the dying would not perish in darkness. For this reason, many medieval households viewed bedtime as a sacred moment, a ritual of preparation for eternity. The head of the family might bless each member, sprinkle holy water, and trace the sign of the cross. In monasteries, monks often fell asleep while silently reciting psalms, so that their last thoughts would be of God. For the pious, it was said, to die in sleep was the gentlest death, a passage as peaceful as falling into dream. As dawn came and sunlight touched the walls, The medieval Christians saw not just another day but a symbolic resurrection. Every sunrise was a renewal of creation, a promise that death itself could not conquer the soul. This is why morning prayers often began with words of gratitude. I have awakened, O Lord, for thou hast kept me through the night. Thus, sleep was both teacher and sacrament. It taught humility, that every day ends in surrender, and faith, that every surrender is followed by awakening. In a world steeped in mortality, this belief transformed the act of sleeping into a daily rehearsal for eternity, a small but profound affirmation that light always returns. If we close our eyes and picture a medieval night, we might imagine a lone candle flickering in a stone chamber, a solitary monk kneeling in prayer. Yet for most of the Middle Ages, sleep was rarely solitary. It was communal, layered, and profoundly social, a shared experience shaped by class, architecture, religion, and the rhythms of daily life. The idea of a private, silent bedroom would not emerge until centuries later. In the medieval world, people slept together in body and breath, and in belief. Let us begin within the monastery, where every aspect of sleep was governed by rule and ritual. The Benedictine monks, for example, followed a strict schedule in which even rest was a form of obedience. Their dormitory, called the dormitorium, was a long, echoing hall lined with simple wooden beds or pallets of straw. There were no curtains, no separation, only the quiet breathing of brothers united in faith and discipline. They wore their habits to bed, ready to rise at any moment for the nightly office of matins, which began often around 2 or 3 in the morning. The rule of Saint Benedict prescribed silence after compline. No monk was to speak once the abbot gave the signal for rest. Darkness was total, save for a single lamp kept burning, a small, glowing reminder of God's eternal presence. Yet even in this austere setting, the act of sleeping together held meaning. The shared dormitory symbolized spiritual equality in sleep. No monk was abbot or novice, rich or poor. All lay in the same posture before God, waiting for the same call to rise and pray. The monk's routine shaped not only their nights but the wider culture's understanding of sleep. Their alternating cycles of waking and resting, work, prayer, brief slumber. Prayer again established a pattern that echoed through medieval life. Indeed, scholars believe that the common phenomenon of segmented sleep to periods of sleep separated by a waking interval in the middle of the night partly derives from monastic rhythms. The first sleep and second sleep were natural to people accustomed to rising for nocturnal devotions. Beyond the cloister walls, in peasant cottages, the communal nature of sleep took on a different form. The typical home was a single room, its floor of beaten earth, its roof of thatch, and its hearth glowing in the center. Whole families, parents, children, sometimes even servants or guests, slept together on benches, straw mats, or large shared beds. In winter, animals might sleep nearby for warmth, their body heat mingling with human breath. Privacy, as we conceive it, did not exist. In such closeness, sleep was not just necessity but bonding. Stories, prayers, and lullabies were shared before bed. The oldest might tell a tale by the dying fire. The youngest drifted off in the crook of a parent's arm. In some regions, people slept head to foot to fit more bodies in the same space. In others, children were swaddled and laid between adults as a protection against cold, though this occasionally led to the tragic danger of suffocation. Arist medieval moralists warned about under the sin of overlay. Peasant nights were also filled with sound, not the silence of the monastery, but the living noises of sleep. Snores, whispered prayers, the crackle of embers, the distant barking of dogs, the wind through shutters, all merged into the lullaby of medieval life. For the rural poor, night was not so much an absence of activity as a change in its tempo. Some rose during the midnight interval to tend animals, stoke the fire, or share quiet conversation before returning to their second sleep. Meanwhile, in the manor halls and castles of the nobility, sleep carried its own customs and hierarchies. A great lord's chamber was both bed and throne, a semi-public stage of authority. Visitors might be received there, meals eaten, and petitions heard while the lord reclined upon his bed. Yet even here solitude was rare. Servants often slept on the floor of the same room, guards stationed by the door, attendants dozing near the fire. The bed itself, though lavishly curtained and draped in embroidered linens, was often shared by husband and wife, sometimes by favored guests or companions. In noble households, bed sharing was a mark of trust and intimacy, not necessarily of eroticism. To lie with someone could mean simply to share warmth and company. Kings and knights sometimes slept beside their squires. Travelers shared beds at inns without scandal. The famous 14th century chronicler Jean Froissart describes squires sleeping 2 or 3 to a bed while on campaign, a practical arrangement rather than a moral question. Yet the aristocratic bed was also a symbol of power. It was often an elaborate piece of furniture, carved and canopied, raised above the floor on a platform. Curtains served both for warmth and for ceremony, marking a boundary between public and private, sacred and profane. The bed of state could even be a site of political ritual. Monarchs received ambassadors, issued decrees, or even took to their bed to dramatize illness or grief. In some royal funerals, effigies were laid upon the deceased's bed to symbolize the eternal rest of kingship. In urban households, where space was limited, beds were also multifunctional. Apprentices often slept in the same room as their masters, sometimes even in the same bed. Inns crammed travelers together indiscriminately, strangers, merchants, pilgrims, even clergy. Complaints about fleas, snoring, and drunken bedfellows were common in medieval letters. But such proximity also fostered conversation and exchange in the night hours. People shared secrets, bargains, or gossip under flickering lamplight. Interestingly, bed sharing also served as a form of witness in law. To sleep in the same bed as another person was considered a sign of closeness, often invoked in courts to prove relationships between spouses, lovers, or even political allies. The very act of sharing sleep bound people in social recognition. The communal nature of medieval sleep also extended to the ritual calendar. On feast nights, Christmas, Easter, midsummer, people might remain awake together in vigil, their night watch blending prayer and celebration. On other nights, especially during storms or eclipses, they gathered for protection, believing that the presence of others repelled demons or witches. Solitude at night was viewed with suspicion. Those who roamed or slept apart were vulnerable to temptation and evil spirits. Indeed, the association between isolation and danger permeated the culture. A lone sleeper might be visited by the Mara, the nightmare spirit said to sit upon one's chest, or by succubi, witches or ghosts. To sleep among others was, paradoxically, a way to stay spiritually safe. The group bed became not just a hearth of warmth, but a fortress against the invisible. For medieval people, then, the night was a time of shared vulnerability, and therefore shared humanity. Sleep stripped away distinctions of wealth, title, and power. The same darkness covered monk and peasant, queen and servant. All were subject to the same rhythms. The descent into silence, the flicker of dream, the slow return to waking light. By the late Middle Ages, however, new notions of privacy and comfort began to emerge. The wealthy increasingly built separate chambers for sleeping. Servants moved to adjacent rooms. Curtains thickened, doors gained locks. The bedchamber became a more personal space, a sign of refinement and status. Yet even then, echoes of communal sleep persisted. Families still gathered for warmth, monks still shared their dormitories, and the village night remained filled with murmuring voices and shared dreams. As the candlelight fades and the embers whisper their last breath, the medieval night reveals its truest face, a realm of uncertainty, enchantment, and fear. The day belonged to the church and the law, but the night, that was the hour of things unseen. In the dark, When the bell of Compline had long ceased and even dogs slept, the world slept between realities, the physical and spiritual overlap, and, to the people of the Middle Ages, those hours were not merely for rest. They were the time when forces both divine and diabolical prowled most freely. To understand medieval sleep, one must first understand medieval darkness. Before artificial light, the night was truly black. Moonlight, starlight, or the faint glow of a dying hearth were the only illuminations available. For most, it was impossible to see even a few paces ahead. Shadows became shapes, silence became voices, and the imagination filled the void. In this vast unknown, fear thrived, not only of thieves or wolves, but of something far worse, spirits without bodies. The church taught that demons roamed the night, seeking the souls of the unguarded. Sin, drunkenness, and unholy lust opened the door to their influence. It was said that in the dark hours, especially between midnight and 3 in the morning, the demonium meridianum, or demon's hour, devils whispered in sleepers' ears, tempting them with blasphemy or despair. The faithful were urged to cross themselves before sleep, to pray for protection, and to avoid sleeping face up, lest a demon mistake them for a corpse and steal their soul through their mouth. One of the most dreaded nocturnal visitations was that of the night hag, known in different lands by many names: Mara Alp, succubus, or witch rider. People awoke unable to move, their chest crushed by invisible weight, their breath stolen by terror. We now know this as sleep paralysis, but to the medieval mind, it was an attack of real malice. Victims described seeing a woman's shadow crouching on their chest, her eyes burning like coals, whispering their name. In Scandinavia, she was the Mara who slipped through keyholes and rode the sleeper's body. In Germany, the Alp left bruises on the skin. In England, she was simply the hag that presents. Folk remedies were numerous. People placed iron knives beneath their pillows, hung garlic or rowan branches above their beds, or scattered salt at doorways. In some villages, it was common to keep a candle burning all night on the first night of a newborn's life, to ward off spirits drawn to the breath of the innocent. In others, sleepers turned their shoes facing away from the bed, so that any demon entering the room would follow the shoes out again. But not all that moved at night was demonic. For the medieval imagination, the line between the supernatural and the holy was thin indeed. Angels were believed to guard sleepers, saints appeared in dreams to give warnings or comfort, and visions received during the night could carry divine meaning. A peasant dreaming of a shining woman with stars in her hair might claim to have seen the Virgin Mary. A monk who dreamt of fire might fear purgatorial visions. Dream books circulated across Europe, claiming to interpret such signs, often blending biblical allegory with pagan superstition. For example, a 13th century dream manual from France advised, "To dream of milk is a sign of blessing if thou art poor, but of deceit if thou art rich. To dream of serpents is to be warned of enemies. To dream of flying is to have the soul lifted in pride, beware of the fall." Dreams thus became both messages and moral tests. People feared not only bad dreams, but the possibility that a dream might reveal their inner sin. The medieval sleeper was never entirely safe, not even within their own mind. Then there were the witches, who, it was said, drew their power from the moonlit hours. Night was their element. The Canon Episcopi, a 10th century church text, already warned of women who believed they rode through the night with Diana or Herodias, joining secret revels. Later centuries transformed these visions into accusations of witchcraft, witches flying to the Sabbath, feasting with devils, or stealing men's strength as they slept. The dream and the accusation blurred until they became one. A man who woke drained and terrified might insist a witch had ridden him. In such a world, sleep was never merely physical. It was a spiritual battleground. The Church prescribed prayers before bed, often invoking saints like Michael the Archangel or the Virgin Mary. The prayer for night protection was common across Europe. "Visit, we beseech thee, O Lord, this habitation, and drive far from it all snares of the enemy. Let thy holy angels dwell herein, to preserve us in peace, and let thy blessing be ever upon us. Children were taught to say, Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. It was not a nursery rhyme then, it was a real plea. Sleep was viewed as a cousin to death, and each night carried the possibility that one might never wake. Even physicians saw sleep as a time of danger and mystery. They wrote that at night, when the body cooled and the humors settled, vapors could rise from the stomach to the brain, causing bad dreams, madness, or even suffocation. Beware of heavy meats before bed, warned one 14th century doctor, for they burden the head and open the gate to the devil. Others recommended burning rosemary or sage in the chamber to purify the air and drive away unclean spirits. The fear of corrupted air, the miasma, mingled with spiritual dread. A foul-smelling night was considered ominous, a sudden wind at midnight, a sign of the devil's passage. Bells might be rung to chase away storms, which were thought to be stirred by witches or demons. Villages sometimes lit bonfires on hilltops during eclipses, believing the smoke would drive away evil influences. The night was also a time when the dead were thought to walk. Many believed that souls in purgatory roamed until their penance was complete, begging the living for prayers. To encounter such a ghost was both terrifying and sacred. People reported hearing voices crying from churchyards, or footsteps passing their window with no body in sight. In some tales, a ghost might knock 3 times on a door, a warning of death within the week. Yet for all its terrors, the medieval night also possessed a strange beauty. The same darkness that concealed demons also revealed stars. The same silence that invited fear could also inspire awe. Pilgrims traveling under moonlight often described feeling closer to God, as though the veil between worlds drew thin. The poet of the Pearl or the visionary Hildegard of Bingen both used images of sleep and night to describe the approach of divine truth, for it was in darkness that light was most clearly seen. The people of the Middle Ages did not flee from their fears, they lived with them. Every creak of wood, every flutter of shadow was part of a larger cosmos, where heaven and hell, body and spirit, dream and waking were all woven together. The night was a teacher, one that spoke in whispers and nightmares. As dawn neared, and the first rooster's call echoed through the village, that fragile world of dream and shadow began to dissolve. Sleepers stirred. The watchman called the hour. Bells rang for lauds, summoning monks to prayer. Another night survived, another soul delivered from darkness. The long shadow of night begins to pale. In a world without clocks, the first sounds of morning are not mechanical but natural. A rooster's cry, the lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind in thatch. For medieval people, dawn was not just the start of another day, it was a spiritual resurrection, a small echo of the world's first light. Each awakening was a return from darkness to vision, from death-like stillness to the warmth of life. In monasteries, the day began with ritual precision. As the faintest blush of light touched the cloister walls, the matins bell would sound, calling the brothers from their narrow pallets. The bell's tone cut through the lingering fog of dreams, summoning bodies and souls alike. The dormitory stirred, robes rustled, bare feet touched cold stone, and soft murmurs of prayer filled the air. No one spoke idly. Words belonged to God first. The monks filed into the chapel, torches flickering along the carved columns, and sang the office of lauds, a hymn to the dawn, to creation's renewal. Gloria Patri et Filio, et Spiritui Sancto echoed through the half-lit air, mingling with bird song outside. The world itself seemed to awaken in harmony with their chant. The daily rhythm of devotion was itself a kind of healing, a structure to steady the heart against the chaos of night. The monk's morning, simple and steady, reminded the medieval world that light was not to be taken for granted. Outside monastery walls and the villages and fields, the awakening was slower but no less sacred. The peasant's bed, if it could be called that, was often a heap of straw, warmed by shared breath and the faint glow of the hearth. As the fire's ashes were stirred and new kindling caught flame, life returned to the cottage. Mothers woke their children, fathers pulled on coarse tunics. The smell of smoke and porridge filled the air. Before work began, a simple prayer was said, "Bless us this day, O Lord, and keep us from evil." The ritual of washing was a small but meaningful act. Water was often cold, drawn from a well or basin, but it symbolized cleansing, not just of body, but of soul. To wash the face at dawn was to remove the residue of dreams, to re-enter the world of the living. Some whispered a verse while doing so, "As I cleanse my face, may my heart be made pure." In many places, people observed the custom of greeting the sun. This was especially true during certain feast days or solstices, when villagers would climb hills to watch the first rays break the horizon, singing or crossing themselves. To greet the sun was to affirm creation, an ancient instinct that Christianity absorbed but did not fully erase. For the nobility, mornings carried their own ceremonials. In a lord's chamber, servants entered softly at dawn, drawing back curtains, lighting candles, and offering wine or water to rinse the mouth. The Lord's waking was almost a public act, a moment of renewal that reasserted hierarchy. The first visitors of the day might already be waiting outside the chamber, ready to seek favors or deliver messages. In royal courts, the king's rising was even recorded as a formal event. Breakfast, such as it was, differed sharply by class. Peasants ate coarse bread, maybe cheese or onions. Monks broke their fast with thin broth or ale. The wealthy might enjoy wheat loaves, honey, or even spiced wine. Yet across all ranks, the meal carried symbolic weight. It was the first act of communion with the day. To eat after surviving the dangers of the night was itself a kind of thanksgiving. The transition from dream to daylight fascinated medieval thinkers. Many writers likened waking to resurrection, the soul returning from the shadowy realm of dreams to its earthly vessel. In sermons, priests often reminded their flock, "Each morning thou art raised anew as Christ from the tomb. Sleep is thy death, and dawn thy mercy." To sleep and rise again was, quite literally, to experience grace. Dreams themselves were not discarded upon waking. In many households, people spoke of their dreams before beginning work, interpreting them as omens for the day. A good dream of light, of water, of laughter, was taken as a sign of blessing. A dark or troubling vision might send someone to confession or to light a candle for protection. The morning recounting of dreams was a communal act, blending folklore, superstition, and faith. Meanwhile, the natural world itself performed its own morning ritual. Bells rang from village churches to mark the canonical hour of prime. Their sound rolled across fields and valleys, calling people to work and prayer alike. Animals were led from barns, bread baked in ovens, smoke rose in thin blue threads from rooftops. The same darkness that had seemed endless only hours before was now utterly banished. Yet even as the light grew, traces of the night remained. Sleep left its mark on faces and hearts alike, the remnants of fear, the memory of strange visions. To awaken fully, the medieval person did more than open their eyes. They re-entered the moral world. Morning was a time of confession, of resolution. Many people pledged aloud to avoid sin, to mend quarrels, to work honestly. In this way, the dawn was not only physical but ethical, the daily rebirth of conscience. The symbolism of light pervaded every aspect of medieval thought. The church saw in it an image of divine truth. Philosophers saw the awakening of reason. Mystics saw the unveiling of the soul. For ordinary people, light was simply life, warmth for the fields, safety for children, and the end of the nightmares that prowled the dark. The dawn bell was thus both practical and metaphysical. It marked the start of labor and the victory of grace over fear. As the sun climbed higher, the memory of the night faded, but it never disappeared completely. The night remained a teacher, a reminder of mortality and mystery. To medieval minds, living meant constantly passing between darkness and light, ignorance and revelation, sleep and wakefulness. Their entire worldview was built on that rhythm, as steady as the tolling of a monastery bell. And so the cycle continued. The day unfolded in toil and prayer. The sun's path mirrored in human effort. And when dusk returned, the same people who had risen in light would prepare once more for darkness. But this time, they did so with faith that the morning would come again, as it always had, and as they believed it always would. The medieval night, with all its fears and visions, was never simply about sleep. It was a theater of the soul, where sin and salvation, shadow and flame, body and spirit met in quiet struggle. Every dawn was a triumph of order over chaos, a renewal of the covenant between man and the world. So, when the morning bell rang, it was not only the sound of time passing. It was the pulse of an entire civilization, echoing through stone, through faith, and through the fragile hearts of those who dared to dream in the dark.